Chapter 691. On the whole, the stream was extremely clear. Only when one got closer and took a closer look could one see the fine rainbow-colored light in the stream. It was as if someone had ground up rainbow-colored crystals and scattered them into the stream. The light was brilliant and incomparably gorgeous. Compared to the scene just now, it was a completely different world. Chu Luiyue glanced sideways at Dumpling. Dumpling stretched out its paw and pointed forward, looking at her eagerly. "You want us to go up along the stream?" Chu Luiyue asked tentatively. Dumpling nodded crazily. Chu Luiyue turned her head and looked at the upstream of the stream. The stream was very narrow. Chu Luiyue could cross it by taking a step forward. It seemed to flow from the depths of the forest and headed in a direction. Chu Luiyue looked along the stream and narrowed her eyes. The source of the stream seemed to be roar. An earth-shattering roar sounded. It was deafening. Compared to the previous roars, this roar was clearly much clearer. In other words, they were closer to the 9th grade magical beast that was about to break through. And this roar also made Chu Luiyue certain that the stream was indeed flowing from the direction of the magical beast. In fact, the rainbow-colored light in the stream was also related to the magical beast. Chu Luiyue thought for a moment and then walked forward. Chang Wanzhou and the others immediately followed silently. It seemed that Chu Luiyue had unknowingly become the leader among them. It was as if with her around, all problems would be solved. There was always a kind of person in this world who could become the most dazzling and important existence no matter where they were. Chu Luiyue was such a person. Although this place was full of danger, they still followed her forward unconsciously. The few of them walked along the stream and gradually walked deeper into the forest. The deeper they went, the larger the stream became, and the colorful light in it became more and more intense. Gradually, the color of the stream began to change. As Chu Luiyue walked, he looked at the stream and thought to himself. The power contained in the stream was becoming more and more abundant. This made her even more curious about what was at the upper reaches of the stream. Along the way, the surroundings were still quiet. Listening carefully, there were only the creaking sounds of them walking through the forest, the rustling of the leaves, and the gurgling of the stream. Other than that, there was no other movement. Didn't Vice Admiral Mu say that there are many high-level magical beasts here? Why haven't we seen a single one after we've been here for so long? The fear in Yi Ranran's heart had gradually dissipated, and he couldn't help but ask curiously. Not to mention high-level magical beasts, I haven't even seen the shadow of a low-level magical beast. In fact, Chu Luiyue also found it strange. When he had come to the mystic forest in the past, there were indeed all kinds of magical beasts roaming around. Even in the evening and at night, when miasma filled the air, rustling sounds could be heard from time to time. It was the movement of magical beasts. But now, this place was indeed a little too quiet. Even if it was really due to the pressure of a 9th grade magical beast that caused many magical beasts to hide, it didn't seem to be in such a state. To put it bluntly, it was dead silence. This place didn't have the slightest bit of vitality. Except for the stream. But in the stream, there was nothing else except for the increasingly rich colors. Maybe we'll find it after we walk a little more. Chu Luiyue said. When a high-level magical beast broke through, it would indeed produce a great amount of pressure, causing the low-level magical beasts in the vicinity to feel a fatal threat and retreat. But it was different when a 9th grade magical beast tried to break through to a divine beast. Even though the pressure was terrifying, the bloodline aura of a divine beast had a natural attraction to other magical beasts. The concept of hierarchy engraved in their bones made them full of reverence and admiration for divine beasts. This would drive them to endure the shocking pressure and go to worship the divine beast. That 9th grade magical beast had caused such a big commotion. Logically speaking, many magical beasts should have gone there. Yi Ranran nodded seriously. After a while, Chu Luiyue felt that the surrounding space seemed to have become sticky. Every step he took consumed more energy than before. It was as if there was an incomparably heavy mountain pressing down on her body, making it almost impossible to breathe. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. This should be caused by the pressure of the 9th grade magical beast. After walking for a while like this, Chu Luiyue's back was already wet with sweat. She took a deep breath and finally stopped. Let's rest for a while. Mu Hongyu and Yi Ran hurriedly found a place to sit down and rest as if they had been granted amnesty. Chu Luiyue also sat cross-legged beside them. Chang Wanzhou stood beside her, standing straight. Chu Luiyue waved at him. Little Zhou, sit down and rest too. From this angle, she could see his slightly pale lips. It was obvious that this journey was not easy for him either. Chang Wanzhou's voice was as cold as ever. I'll just stand. In case of any danger, standing was more convenient than sitting. He used to do this when he followed that person. Chu Luiyue did not know whether to laugh or cry. Of course, she knew what Chang Wanzhou was thinking. Little Zhou, don't worry too much. This area should already be the territory of that 9th grade magical beast. Except for itself, anyone else who comes here will be the same as us. There won't be too much danger. Besides, you should rest for a while. Chang Wanzhou was very stubborn. He shook his head and pursed his thin lips tightly. His forehead was full of sweat, flowing down his exquisite jade-like face, along his neck, and finally into his gray linen clothes. At this moment, he was obviously not feeling well. Chu Luiyue sighed softly and said, Little Zhou, in fact, a month's time has already passed. You are no longer my follower, so you don't have to do this anymore. Chang Wanzhou suddenly trembled and looked at her, a trace of panic flashing in his eyes. You don't want me anymore? Chu Luiyue was confused. What is this about? No, don't misunderstand. I just think that the contract between us has ended, so you don't have to ask yourself to be my follower anymore. In fact, you are now my junior brother, aren't you? Chu Luiyue said this. The corners of her mouth raised slightly, and there seemed to be bright stars in her eyes. Chang Wanzhou breathed a sigh of relief. No need. After that, as if afraid that Chu Luiyue would misunderstand, he said again, I think it's good this way. He was used to this kind of life and did not want to make any changes. Seeing that he was so stubborn, Chu Luiyue knew that it was useless to persuade him, so she simply gave up. Anyway, this child always had a bunch of strange persistence. It was not bad to treat him as a junior brother and follow him like this. While Chu Luiyue was thinking, she suddenly heard the sound of something breaking through the air. A gust of cold air came towards her neck. Her heart suddenly jumped. Danger. Digression. Tomorrow at 12:00 to mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 692. Chang Wanzhou stepped to the side, stood in front of Chu Luiyue, and swung his sword. The sound of something breaking could be heard. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat, and she turned her head to look. There was no one in the forest in the distance. Beside her feet was a wooden arrow that had been broken into 2 pieces. The wooden arrow was made of a tree branch, and it was only as thick as a thumb. The workmanship was very simple, and only the sharp arrowhead had a sharp aura. However, it was this small wooden arrow that made Chu Luiyue feel an extreme sense of danger the moment it rushed over. It was clear that the other party was very powerful. Chu Luiyue looked up again and looked around. However, she still didn't see anyone around. What's going on? Did someone sneak attack us? Mu Hongyu and Yi Ran hurriedly walked over when they heard the commotion. Both of them looked nervous. Chu Luiyue picked up the broken wooden arrow and looked around carefully. It seemed that the wooden arrow was newly made. The other party's arrow was more of a test. Chu Luiyue's gaze shifted slightly and finally landed in a certain direction. What kind of skill is this to attack someone secretly? Why don't you come out and meet me? The wind blew the leaves, rustling them. Other than that, no one else responded. Chu Luiyue waited for a while, but there was still no response from the other party. She exerted a little force in her palm, and a ball of red flames shot out. The wooden arrow quickly burned in her hand, and finally turned into a handful of ashes and was completely annihilated. She knew that the other party could see it, and that was her warning. If you don't want to come out, then it's best that we stay out of each other's business. Chu Luiyue said coldly. With that, she turned around and continued to walk upstream. Chang Wanzhou followed with his sword. Yi Ran quickened his pace and couldn't help but ask, Luyu, the other party sneaked an attack. Are we just going to let this go? Chu Liuyue's lips twitched imperceptibly. Under normal circumstances, she naturally wouldn't let it go so easily. But now, on one hand, the other party was probing, and on the other hand, it was more important to find that 9th grade magical beast as soon as possible. If he continued to tangle with the other party, who knew how much time he would have to waste? Let's wait until they dare to come out. Them? Not only Yi Ranran, but even Mu Hongyu was shocked. Could it be that there was more than one person? Chu Luiyue gently nodded and did not explain further. In fact, she had indeed sensed the auras of the two people just now. Although it was vague, he could still feel it. Why are there still people here? Mu Hongyu muttered softly. When they looked back, the forest was already. She thought that there were only the 4 of them here. Chu Luiyue pondered for a moment. She had a vague guess in her mind. The person who ambushed her was probably the person in charge of protecting the 9th grade magical beast. But such a guess was too absurd. Not to mention how powerful a 9th grade magical beast was. Even if it was facing a breakthrough and was in danger of being vulnerable, there might not be any magical beast willing to let a human protect it. Under normal circumstances, high-level magical beasts would be somewhat hostile and suspicious of humans. They didn't trust humans, so why would they entrust such an important task to them? Therefore, after this thought surfaced, Chu Liuyue quickly suppressed it. The more likely guess was that the 2 of them were also here for the 9th grade magical beast. Chu Liuyue suppressed her thoughts and continued forward. The color in the stream had become more and more intense. Clusters of colors gathered together, and the stream was resplendent. An extremely faint fragrance wafted out. Mu Hongyu wrinkled her nose. Hey, do you guys smell anything? It seems to be the fragrance in the stream. Yi Ranran also took 2 deep breaths and was a little surprised. It seems to be there. But this smell doesn't seem to be the smell of medicinal herbs. She had been cultivating with Elder Shui and had seen countless medicinal herbs, so she could tell what it was with just a sniff. Although the fragrance was faint, it was indeed something she had never smelled before. Luyu, what do you think? Yi Ranran looked at Chu Liuyue with some uncertainty. After seeing Chu Liuyue's refining skills, Yi Ranran knew that Chu Liuyue's refining skills were definitely above hers. Therefore, he believed her even more now. However, Chu Liuyue seemed to be in a daze. She looked absent-minded and didn't say anything. Yi Ranran called out to her curiously. Luyu, Luyu? Chu Liuyue suddenly came back to her senses. Luyu, what's wrong with you? What are you thinking about? It's nothing. Chu Liuyue shook her head. I just feel that this smell is a little familiar. The few of them looked over curiously. Mu Hongyu's almond-shaped eyes lit up. Luyu, so you've smelled this before? What exactly is it? Chu Liuyue shook her head hesitantly. I'm not sure, she had thought for a long time just now, but she couldn't remember what the smell was. She didn't know why she felt that the fragrance was familiar. She didn't know where this subtle feeling came from. Mu Hongyu looked a little disappointed at first, but she quickly pulled herself together. Since you feel that it's familiar, you must have seen it before. It's just that you can't remember it now. Maybe you'll remember it if you walk further in. Chu Liuyue nodded. They continued to walk forward. The deeper they went, the heavier the pressure became, so they slowed down. Every once in a while, they had to stop and rest for a while. However, the person who sneaked up on them didn't appear again. On the other side, after Jiang Yuqing fell into the gully, he felt his body falling continuously. At first, the gully was a little narrow. His body kept rubbing against the sharp stone walls, leaving many wounds. He circulated the force in his body, wanting to escape this place. However, he was shocked to find that his strength was being suppressed by an inexplicable force. In the darkness, he couldn't see anything, and he couldn't break free. He could only let his body continue to fall. Fortunately, the deeper he went, the more spacious his surroundings became. Gradually, he stopped bumping into the stone wall. However, this didn't calm Jiang Yuqing down. Instead, it made him more nervous. Who would have thought that there would be such a strange and spacious space under the mystic forest? Clearly, there was something wrong with everything here. One Earth. Mu Qinghe. He called out the names of a few people, but no one responded. In the spacious space, only his own voice was echoing. Puff! In this tense state, Jiang Yuqing finally landed on the ground. No, to be precise, this wasn't a very thick ground. It seemed to be Jiang Yuqing took out a water pearl. A faint glow shone in all directions. He finally saw his surroundings clearly. With one look, he immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. At this moment, he was actually in a black swamp. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 693. As far as the eye could see, the black, sticky swamp was almost endless. The stench of decay filled the air. It was nauseating and almost suffocating. What is this place? Jiang Yuqing was shocked. At the same time, he felt extremely disgusted. He wished he could leave this place immediately. Almost subconsciously, he raised his head to take a look. It was dark, and there was not a trace of light. Jiang Yuqing's heart harshly sank. Is this? The entrance is sealed. Otherwise, there shouldn't be no light at all. He quickly looked around and called out a few people's names. Still, no one answered. Am I the only one who fell down? Jiang Yuqing frowned. What he didn't know was that after him, Shangguan Wan, Mu Qinghe, and the others were also dragged down. However, they all fell into different gullies, so they naturally weren't with him. At this moment, their situation wasn't much better than Jiang Yuqing's. However, Jiang Yuqing didn't know any of this. He really couldn't stand the environment of this place, so he could only choose a random direction and plan to get out first. However, just as he lifted his foot, he couldn't lift it. An ominous premonition surged in his heart, and he slowly lowered his head to look. His 2 feet had already sunk into the swamp. Unbeknownst to him, it had already reached his ankles without him noticing. Jiang Yuqing's heart tightened, and he immediately raised his chi. However, there seemed to be something under the swamp that was holding him tightly, and he couldn't break free. After repeatedly trying various methods, not only did Jiang Yuqing not come out, but he sank even deeper. The swamp was already up to his calves. He couldn't go on like this. Jiang Yuqing's mind raced, and he finally took out an icicle the size of a thumb. He poured his force into it, and a cold chill immediately spread out from it. His hands were covered with a thin layer of frost. Then, the chill spread out in all directions. After a while, the swamp around him began to freeze. Jiang Yuqing held on to the layer of hard ice above him and finally pulled himself out of the swamp. A strong stench assailed his nostrils. His feet and even his calves were covered in a thick layer of black mud. One of the boots had fallen into the mud and was unable to be brought out. Jiang Yuqing sat paralyzed on the ice. Suppressing his nausea, he threw away his other boot. In his memory, he had never been in such a sorry state. After cleaning up the dirt on his body, Jiang Yuqing finally got up. In all directions, there was only endless darkness. He furrowed his brows. Mu Qinghe had never mentioned that there was such a place in the mystic forest. Just as he was hesitating, a strange sound suddenly came from afar. In this quiet place where even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard, even the slightest movement would be infinitely amplified. Jiang Yuqing was in a state of high tension. When he heard this voice, his heart trembled. He held his breath and walked in the direction of the voice. What he did not see was that after he left, a hand reached out from the swamp behind him. The eerie white bones of a skeleton waved at his back, and then fell silent again. The swamp surged silently. It seemed that something was moving quietly. Chu Luiwei and the others walked for about an hour. The trees around them gradually became sparse, but they were all very thick and looked as if they had been growing for 100 years. An incomparably gorgeous, colorful barrier appeared in front of them. The terrifyingly powerful pressure was coming from above. Chu Luiwei stared at the barrier and said in a deep voice, "It seems that we can't go any further." Plop. Yi Ran panted heavily and sat on the ground. "I'm so tired. What kind of magical beast is this? Its pressure is so strong." She was the weakest among them, but she didn't complain at all along the way and insisted on keeping up with them. After saying that, she did not forget to feed herself a pill to replenish her strength. Then she gave one to each of the remaining 3 people. Although Chu Luwei also brought her own pill, she accepted it with a smile when she saw Yi Ran enthusiastically handing it over. Chang Wanzhou saw that she accepted it and did not refuse. Chu Luwei swallowed the pill and adjusted her breathing as she turned around to look at the barrier. This barrier was like a huge colorful semicircular glass cover that enveloped this area. That stream was originally just a very ordinary stream in the forest. But because it happened to be crossed by this barrier, countless colorful streams of light flowed down and fell into the stream. Gradually, it became what they saw. The place where the stream and the barrier were connected had even condensed into a solid state. From afar, it looked like a huge colorful crystal was pressing down on it. Countless colors melted into the stream, and it was incomparably magnificent. Above the barrier, a vast and terrifying pressure was exuding, indicating that it was a supreme being. Even just standing in front of it, Chu Luwei faintly felt a little breathless. She had been to the mystic forest before, but she had never seen such a scene. When did it appear, or did it exist in the first place? And what exactly was inside this barrier? Because the barrier was too dazzling, they couldn't see what was going on inside. As for the fragrance, it was also coming from the barrier. That sense of familiarity was getting stronger. Chu Luwei almost couldn't control herself as she walked forward. Chang Wanzhou frowned and immediately stopped her. A hint of worry flashed across the young man's beautiful face. "It's dangerous." Chu Luwei looked into his clear eyes and smiled. "Don't worry, I know what to do." Chang Wanzhou looked back at the barrier and said, "It's fine. I'll do it." With that, he raised his foot and walked forward. He held the cloud sky copper sword tightly with both hands. It was as if he would immediately swing his sword if anything happened. Chu Luwei pulled him back. Seeing Chang Wanzhou's stubborn face, Chu Luwei could only sigh. "How about this? I'll be in front, and you'll be behind. If anything really happens, you'll be by my side. It won't be too late to make a move." Chang Wanzhou pondered for a moment before finally agreeing. Chu Luwei took 2 steps forward and stood in front of him. At this moment, she was only 1 step away from the rainbow-colored barrier. As long as she stretched out her hand, she would be able to easily reach it. Chu Luwei took a deep breath and quickly circulated the force in her body. At the same time, she gripped the glass barrier tightly with one hand and prepared herself. Actually, what she did not tell Chang Wanzhou and the others was she did not feel that this barrier was dangerous. For some reason, she felt that this barrier did not seem to be a threat to her, even though the power on it was enough to destroy her. Chu Luwei slowly stretched out her hand. Tuanzi squatted on her shoulder, and colorful lights were reflected in her eyes. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 694. A cold aura suddenly came from the side. Chu Luwei's eyes were slightly cold. Chang Wanzhou had already raised his sword. Buzz. Right in front of him, Chu Luwei could even hear the sound of the arrow's tail vibrating violently. Chang Wanzhou's hair on his forehead was swayed by the tyrannical aura. A trace of piercing pain came from between his eyebrows. The cloud sky copper sword was already in front of him. As long as that arrow moved an inch forward, it would be cut down by him. However, at this moment, that arrow actually stopped 3 steps away from the 2 of them. Chu Luwei could even see the ripples in the void. It was like a stone thrown into a lake, causing countless ripples. This was a long black arrow made of fine iron. It was made of excellent quality, with smooth lines and incomparably sharp. Compared to the crude wooden arrow just now, it was completely different. This attack contained a true killing intent. Chu Luwei looked towards the direction of that arrow and narrowed his eyes. "Since things have come to this, you better come out. There's no point in hiding." As soon as he finished speaking, the forest fell silent. Chang Wanzhou was still holding his sword tightly and was extremely vigilant. Mu Hongyu and Yi Ranran's hearts were also raised as they looked over. A moment later, a tall and sturdy man walked out. He was born with thick eyebrows and big eyes. He was wearing coarse hemp clothes and had bronze-colored skin. Coupled with his strong muscles, he was very tall and strong. Chu Luiwei was slightly shocked. She actually didn't see any figure of such a strong and sturdy man just now, nor did she hear any sound of movement. If she didn't feel the aura on his body, she was afraid that she wouldn't know that such a person had always been following them. It was enough to see the strength of this man. Chu Luiwei had just broken through to the 5th stage and was unable to pry into the other party's true realm. But from the aura around him, he was at least at the middle stage of the 7th stage. It was even possible that he was at the peak of the 7th stage. He was holding a bow in his hand and carrying a quiver of arrows on his back. It was obvious that he was the one who had attacked. Strangely, there was a black hammer on his waist. The hammer was dark in color, and its bottom seemed to be engraved with silver patterns. However, Chu Luiwei couldn't see what it was. Mu Hongyu and Yi Ranran became even more nervous when they sensed the strength of the newcomer. This person? If they were to really fight, they might not be a match for him even if they joined forces. Chu Luiwei also noticed this. Therefore, she patted Chang Wanzhou's shoulder. "Little boat, step back." Chang Wanzhou did not move, and the cloud sky copper sword emitted a chilling intent. His entire body was brimming with battle intent. It was as if they had already made up their minds to fight with their lives on the line. Chu Luiwei didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Xiao Zhou, let's not fight with him. If they fought, they would be the ones at a disadvantage. Why bother?" Chu Luiwei had always been very sensible. If they could win, they would fight. If they couldn't, they would run. The key was that she didn't have the confidence to successfully escape from this man's hands with these few people. So, it wasn't a bad idea to sit down and have a chat. Chang Wanzhou finally took half a step back, but he was still on guard as he looked at the man opposite him with vigilance. That man didn't seem to mind as he laughed out loud. "You're quite sensible." He had long seen that this young lady in red was the backbone of this group of people. Chu Luiwei also laughed. "I'm Chu Luiwei. May I know your name?" That man saw that Chu Luiwei was so straightforward and was forthright. "Lei Laosi." Lei Laosi? This didn't seem like a name but more like a nickname. However, Chu Luiwei wouldn't delve into this matter. Lei Laosi raised his hand, and his fan-like palm was filled with a thick layer of calluses. His fingers moved slightly, and the black arrow that was suspended in front of Chu Luiwei and Chang Wanzhou rapidly retreated. He grabbed the arrow and threw it back into the quiver. "You guys look young and you're all from wealthy families, right? Why did you guys come here for no reason?" Lei Laosi scoffed and hugged his arms as he leaned against a thick piece of wood at the side. "This is not a fun place to be." Chu Luiwei could see that he actually didn't have any ill intentions towards them, so she felt slightly more at ease. If he really wanted to kill them, he wouldn't have waited until now. Chu Luiwei thought for a while and said, "Actually, I'm not going to lie. To be honest, this time we came with Her Highness the Third Princess." "Which third princess are you talking about?" Chu Luiwei was halfway through her sentence when she saw Lei Laosi's expression change, and a fierce glint flickered in his eyes. "It seems like this Lei Laosi seems to know Shangguanwan." Chu Luiwei hesitated for a while and still spoke. "Isn't there only one third princess in the Tianling dynasty?" Just as she said that, Lei Laosi's expression turned completely gloomy, and he directly drew out another arrow. He loaded the arrow and pulled the bow. The cold and sharp arrowhead pointed directly at Chu Luiwei. "So you guys are her people?" Lei Laosi's face was filled with undisguised murderous intent. "Since that's the case, all of you deserve to die." The sound of the bow being fully pulled could be heard, and it made one's heart tighten. Sensing the danger, Chang Wanzhou raised his sword. A sparrow blue flame suddenly rose. Lei Laosi glanced from the corner of his eye, squinted his eyes, and sneered. "Do you guys deserve to use such a sword?" As he spoke, he was about to release the arrow. Chu Luiwei immediately said, "We don't. We're not Shangguanwan's people." Hearing that name, Lei Laosi's eyes twitched slightly. He sneered. "You just said that you followed her here. Why are you saying that you're not her people now? You're full of lies." Chu Luiwei lifted her hand and pressed Chang Wanzhou's wrist, forcefully pressing his sword down. Then, she stepped forward with a calm expression and said word by word, "We did indeed come here. It's true that we came with her, but that doesn't mean we're her people. In fact, she brought a total of thousands of people here this time. Lei Laosi was slightly shocked. What? Why did she bring so many people here? Chu Luiwei quickly explained the situation simply. That's why so many of us came here this time. However, not long ago we got separated from them and came here. As for the others, we don't know where they are now. After hearing that, Lei Laosi's expression gradually calmed down. You said that you guys are from Chongshu Pavilion? Chu Luiwei nodded slightly and glanced at Mu Hongyu again. She's from Dragon Teeth Mountain, but she's our friend. Dragon Teeth Mountain? Lei Laosi scoffed, but the murderous intent in his eyes had already dissipated. Chu Luiwei heaved a sigh of relief in her heart. It seemed like she guessed correctly. This Lei Laosi indeed didn't have any ill intentions toward Chongshu Pavilion and Dragon Teeth Mountain. On account of the Chongshu Pavilion's pavilion master, I'll let you guys off this time. Leave quickly. Lei Laosi waved his hand impatiently. Chu Luiwei glanced at the colorful barrier beside her and didn't move. We're already here, so how can we leave? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 695. Chu Luiwei didn't move, so the rest of the people naturally didn't move either. The scene was silent for a moment. Lei Laosi felt that something was amiss, and his thick brows knitted tightly. But, didn't you hear what I said just now? Chu Luiwei smiled and said, Brother Lei, you followed us. I'm sure you know that we came here because we want to see what exactly is in the upper reaches of the stream. We finally came here with much difficulty, but you're asking us to leave directly. Isn't this a little inappropriate? Lei Laosi laughed as though he heard a joke. He looked at them as though he was looking at unreasonable children who didn't know what was good for them. He lifted his chin. I know you want to enter this barrier, but why don't you take a look at where this is? Do you have the ability to enter? You just barged in like this. You're really a newborn calf that isn't afraid of a tiger. Aren't you afraid of dying here for no reason? Chu Luiwei said very politely and sincerely, Brother Lei, I'm very grateful for your advice. However, I've always been someone who cherishes my life very much. I will never do anything that could threaten my life. Since I did it, it proves that I have the confidence to escape unscathed. Arrogant. Lei Laosi shouted angrily. You guys are still here for that mythical beast. In the end, aren't you still here to get that mythical beast's blood for Shangguanwan? What for Her Majesty? It's all bullshit. His words were filled with disdain and hatred for Shangguanwan. Chu Luiwei's heart stirred slightly. Hearing this, Lei Laosi doesn't seem to have an ordinary enmity with Shangguanwan, and he even seems to know about Her Majesty, but looking at his appearance, he's clearly a savage living in the forest. Could it be that he was persecuted by Shangguanwan in the past, so he came to the mystic forest? Chu Luiwei shook his head. Brother Lei, don't misunderstand. We really don't have any relationship with Shangguanwan, and it's even more impossible for us to do anything for her. The only people who are willing to do this for her are Jiang Yuqing and those people, but it definitely doesn't include us. Lei Laosi suddenly thought of something, and he asked with a gloomy expression, What's wrong? Jiang Yuqing is here too? This sentence of his seemed to be squeezed out from the gaps of his teeth. Every word was filled with bone-piercing hatred. Compared to how he treated Shangguanwan just now, it was actually comparable. Chu Luiwei nodded. Ants Hearts' eyes. Lei Laosi's. Lei, to tell you the truth, we only walked a short distance just now. However, when we turned around to look, we could no longer see their traces. Lei Laosi's. Teat. Lei Laosi only felt that there was movement in the forest outside just now, but he didn't think too much of it. He didn't expect. They actually dealt with Shangguanwan and Jiang Yuqing's group. The heavens really have eyes. This time, even if they don't die, it's definitely enough for them to suffer. Thinking of what they were going through right now, Lei Laosi's mood instantly improved, and a smile appeared at the corner of his eyes. Since you guys can avoid the miasma and come here, it proves that you guys are rather lucky. But this place isn't a place for you guys to stay. If you guys still don't want to leave, then I'll send you guys off personally. Treat it as a reward for sending me such good news." As he spoke, Lei Laosi took out the hammer at his waist. Just as he was about to make a move, he saw the girl opposite him smiling with curved eyes. "Brother Lei, it's fine if we don't go in, but can you let us take a look here? After all, we haven't seen a 9th grade fiend break through, so it's inevitable that we're curious. Look, it wasn't easy for us to get here." When she smiled, her eyes seemed to be sprinkled with a galaxy that was dazzling and resplendent. Lei Laosi suddenly froze. His appearance and demeanor really did look a little. Seeing that Lei Laosi's expression was stunned for a moment, Chu Luiyue thought that he was persuaded, so she hurriedly continued, "We'll definitely stay here and stay here. We promise that we'll only stay here. We won't move or cause any trouble. After we're done looking, we'll leave immediately. How about that?" Looking at her eager expression, Lei Laosi's heart actually wavered a little. Then, he looked in the direction behind Chu Luiyue and the rest without batting an eyelid. Chu Luiyue knew that he was looking at another person. Even though she didn't know who that person was or why that person didn't show himself, it should be someone with a similar status as Lei Laosi. Lei Laosi's glance was obviously discussing with that person. Chu Luiyue's eyes flickered and she continued, "Since you're here, Big Brother Lei, are you still afraid that we'll cause any trouble? Besides, many things happened in Xiling City recently. Why don't we sit down and have a chat?" Lei Laosi scoffed coldly. "You're so young, but you have such a glib tongue. It's not that you can't stay here and watch, but all of you have to take 10 steps back. Without my permission, no one is allowed to move." He didn't know why, but when he looked at Chu Luiyue, it seemed like he couldn't harden his heart. Somehow, there seemed to be an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Chu Luiyue was delighted. "Thank you, Big Brother Lei." After saying that, she hurriedly winked at the few people and pulled them back. Tuanzi waved its claws reluctantly and looked at the colorful boundary with a longing look. "Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more." Chu Luiyue sensed its restlessness, so she grabbed its tail and pressed it into her arms as she softly said, "Don't worry." She whispered, "Dumpling, listen to me." Tuanzi had no choice but to stay in her arms obediently, but her eyes kept drifting over there. After taking 10 steps back, Chu Luiyue and the rest stood still. Lei Laosi looked at them and asked, "What happened in Xiling City? Tell me about it." Chu Luiyue smiled in her heart and thought that he indeed wanted to know. She calculated for a while and said, "In a few months, Shangguan Wan and Jiang Yuqing will be getting married." Lei Laosi immediately stood up straight, and the veins on his forehead popped out. His face flushed red and was filled with shock and anger. How dare they? A roar that shook the mountains and rivers suddenly came from that colorful barrier. Boom! Dark clouds rolled in the sky. A silver snake-like lightning quickly gathered in the clouds. A terrifying aura swept across the area. The forest howled. Chu Luiyue trembled, and even her eardrums were about to burst. The rest weren't any better, and their faces all turned pale. Chu Luiyue quickly looked up. Countless rainbow-colored streams of light were converging upward. Is this about to break through? Dumpling popped its head out from her arms, and its pair of black eyes gradually turned colorful. Digression. Update at noon. I'm going out in the afternoon, so the remaining 2 updates will have to be updated at night. It's about 8 or 9 p.m. Everyone, please wait for a while. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 696. At this moment, Chu Luiyue was fully focused on the colorful barrier and did not notice the subtle changes in Dumpling, who was in his arms. In the sky, Tianlei was moving crazily in the thick clouds and quickly converging. From the looks of it, it did not seem to be any weaker than the power of Tianlei that Chu Luiyue had attracted when he was forging the Cloud Sky Copper Sword. Chu Luiyue narrowed his eyes slightly. Actually, I miss it a little. At that time, Tianlei had refused to come down for a long time, and she had spent a lot of effort to tidy it up. If the people around her knew what Chu Luiyue was thinking at this moment, their jaws would probably drop in shock. In this world, whether it was cultivators or magical beasts, they both loved and feared Tianlei. They loved the powerful energy contained within it. As long as they could trigger Tianlei, it basically meant that their strength had increased. At the very least, it would be an increase in the grade of the Yuan tool. They hated the power of Tianlei. If they were not careful, they might even lose their lives. However, there was probably only one person like Chu Luiyue who had forcefully pulled Tianlei down from the sky and stuffed it into the Yuan tool to temper it. After that, he still could not forget about it. Even Taizu could not help but say, "Girl, don't tell me you want to snatch Tianlei from him." That was only attracted when he broke through to become a divine beast, Chu Luiyue coughed. "Taizu, look at what you're saying. Am I that kind of person?" Taizu was silent for a while before he said faintly, "How would I know?" Chu Luiyue was speechless. It seemed that the previous incident had left quite a shadow in Taizu's heart. "Don't worry, I'm just looking to see what kind of magical beast is breaking through here. I don't have any other thoughts. After all, I've already contracted a divine beast, right?" Chu Luiyue advised inwardly. Although the legendary three-eyed eagle had yet to recover its physical body, she already had the corpse of the great phoenix dragon and a piece of purple gold Bodhi leaf. As long as she could find some matching herbs, she could find a suitable time and place to help the legendary three-eyed eagle rebuild its physical body. Other people might have a fervent desire for mythological beasts, but she really didn't. The Taizu were relieved to hear this. "Since you said so, I naturally believe you. Besides, even if there was another you wouldn't be able to break through this colorful barrier. That Lei Laosi is right. This place is indeed dangerous. Just stay here and take a good look before leaving." Taizu's voice had a hint of solemnity and seriousness. Chu Luiyue was slightly moved. "Thank you, Taizu." The Taizu did not reply. Chu Luiyue looked at the huge hemispherical barrier in front of him and fell into deep thought. She knew that the barrier was powerful, but she didn't expect Taizu to think so highly of it. Could it be? Was he really that strong? They couldn't see what was happening inside the barrier at all, even though they were very close to it. Apart from the beautiful flowing light, nothing else could be seen. There wasn't even a rough outline. What was there to see? Chu Luiyue couldn't help but ask the legendary three-eyed eagle in his mind. "Now, can you sense what kind of magical beast is inside?" This time, the legendary three-eyed eagle hesitated for a moment before saying, "No idea." Chu Luiyue felt a little strange. Logically speaking, the legendary three-eyed eagle was a divine beast, and its rank was higher than a 9th-grade demonic beast. At such a close distance, he should be able to sense the other party's aura. "If even you don't know," as if sensing the suspicion in Chu Luiyue's words, the legendary three-eyed eagle explained. "This rainbow-colored barrier should have been built by the demonic beast a long time ago. It contains an extremely powerful force. Furthermore, if he was not wrong, he should have used other means. So for a while I can't tell." "I see." Chu Luiyue believed it a little in his heart and couldn't help but be more curious. He laughed. "It's really strange. There's actually such a smart and powerful 9th-grade demonic beast in this world. No wonder it could try to break through to the divine beast level. I just don't know what it is. If only I could see it with my own eyes." Even if it was just to satisfy her curiosity, it would be fine. The legendary three-eyed eagle didn't reply. Dumpling shrunk into Chu Luiyue's arms with a guilty conscience. He quickly glanced at her, and then looked at the rainbow-colored barrier. Above the barrier, there seemed to be countless rainbow-colored sand flowing gently. It was magnificent and intoxicating. Whoosh! A huge shadow flashed within the barrier. Chu Luiyue's eyes lit up. She immediately sat up straight and looked over. However, that shadow disappeared in a flash and quickly dispersed among the countless flowing light. Chu Luiyue didn't even see what shape it was. A look of disappointment flashed across her face. This demonic beast was really strange. It didn't even show its face until now. What a pity! I didn't even see what it was just now. Mu Hongyu held her face in frustration and regret. The golden mane bear cub suddenly appeared and burrowed into her arms. It looked at it with her. Mu Hongyu pinched its ears and laughed. "Song Song, why did you come out? Aren't you afraid now?" The golden mane bear cub obediently stayed there and let her pinch it. Hearing this, it actually shook its head. It was saying that it wasn't afraid. Mu Hongyu was very happy. She widened her almond eyes and asked, "Are you really not afraid? That's a 9th grade demonic beast." The golden mane bear cub was also a high-level demonic beast, but compared to this 9th grade demonic beast, it was nothing. She originally thought that Song Song wouldn't dare to come out. After all, not long ago, it was quite anxious. Then why were you so afraid before? Did Song Song become more powerful? The golden mane bear cub had been with Mu Hongyu since it was born. As a result, Mu Hongyu always looked after it as if it was a baby. Even though the golden mane bear cub was now half her height and even heavier than her, she would still coax and play with it. The golden mane bear cub sneaked a glance at Tuanzi, who was next to it. Dumpling was playing with Chu Liuyue's hair. She flicked her claws lightly. The golden mane bear cub immediately looked away and nodded at Mu Hongyu's question. Mu Hongyu smiled happily and proudly. "Since you want to see it too, let's see it together." Speaking of which, it would also break through when it reached adulthood, right? Just now. Was that a wing? Yi Ranran suddenly asked in a low voice with uncertainty. Mu Hongyu looked at her. "A wing? Did you see it?" Yi Ranran shook her head. "I was just guessing. But at first glance, it looked a little like, now that you mention it, it does seem like it." Mu Hongyu thought for a moment and suddenly became spirited. "It should be a flapping wing. But the shape looks a little strange. I've never seen a wing like this before." Chu Liyue tilted her head and looked at the two of them. "What kind of wing?" Yi Ranran raised her hand and drew a line in the air. "It's like this." Digression, updated at around 9:30 a.m. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 697. Boom. A bolt of Tianlei landed. A loud clap of thunder was heard. It reverberated through heaven and earth. The suppression it contained was extremely strong, and the violent energy spread in all directions crazily. The wind howled and swept across everything. The trees around Chu Liyue and the rest were all blown apart, and some were even uprooted. Smoke and dust rose everywhere. Chu Liyue was slightly shocked. Just as she was about to move, she felt a gentle yet powerful energy shrouding her. That terrifying turbulence was instantly blocked outside. Chu Liyue looked back in shock and saw that Lei Laosi had set up a white barrier. Ice blue lightning-like radiance flickered on the barrier. Chu Liyue looked over and realized that Lei Laosi was holding that hammer in his hand. The energy of this barrier seemed to be emitted from that hammer. Now you know how powerful it is, right? Just the aftermath just now would have taken half of your lives. Lei Laosi scoffed coldly, and his face was filled with the expression of, "I knew that you bunch of rookies don't have any combat power." Facing Lei Laosi's disdain, Chu Liyue didn't mind at all and thanked him seriously instead. "Thank you, big brother Lei." Lei Laosi didn't expect that not only was Chu Liyue not fearful at all, but she also thanked him so directly. Furthermore, her expression was very sincere, and he was stunned on the spot. For a moment, he didn't know how to retract that ferocious expression on his face. Wasn't this little girl a little too smart for her own good? How am I supposed to continue? Lei Laosi felt bored and could only retract his expression embarrassedly. With Chu Liyue taking the lead, Mu Hongyu and Yi Ranran followed closely behind and said to Lei Laosi in unison, "Big brother Lei." "Thank you, big brother Lei." The two young ladies' eyes were filled with sincerity, and they seemed to be even more sincere than Chu Liyue. Lei Laosi's eyes twitched. He was a rough man who was used to fighting and killing, but this was the first time he was repeatedly thanked by a few pretty girls. Lei Laosi instantly felt even more uncomfortable, and his hand that was holding onto the hammer became restless. I really want these young ladies to stop talking and stop looking at me with such grateful eyes." Chu Liyue found it funny when he saw how awkward Lei Laosi looked, as though he had hair all over his body. This Lei Laosi looked carefree and boorish, but he was actually a good person. Most importantly, he seemed to be a little awkward. He was obviously helping, but he had to put on a fierce and overbearing look, as if he was afraid that others would know that he had good intentions. His temper was similar to someone in the 13 U Guards. Thinking of that person, Chu Luiyue couldn't help but smile. Lei Laosi instantly exploded. "WW, what are you laughing at?" Chu Luiyue coughed. "It's nothing. I just feel that Big Brother Lei is somewhat similar to an old friend of mine. Although their temperaments and personalities are similar, their figures and appearances are worlds apart." Lei Laosi was skeptical, but he didn't continue to ask. He felt really uncomfortable being stared at by Chu Luiyue's smiling face, so he could only turn his head away. Don't look. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over." Chu Luiyue smiled for a while more before letting him go. She raised her head and glanced at the colorful barrier again. When the first Tianlei landed, its power had already gradually dissipated, and the waves it produced had also gradually calmed down. She unintentionally took a look and shockingly discovered that the lowest part of the barrier had unknowingly turned transparent. Although the area wasn't big, she could already see a small area shrouded in the barrier. Piles of fallen leaves and half a stream. This was the mystic forest, and there were always thick piles of fallen leaves on the ground. However, although she could only see this, it was already enough to make Chu Luiyue rather excited. It seemed that after that Tianlei landed, the fiend inside swallowed a portion of the barrier's power, which resulted in this situation. A 9th-grade fiend had to experience 9 Tianlei when it broke through to become a legendary fiend. Once all 9 bolts of heavenly lightning fell, perhaps the barrier would completely dissipate. By then, she would be able to find out the truth thoroughly. When this Tianlei landed, it interrupted Yi Ranran's actions. After seeing the changes on the barrier, everyone's attention was attracted, and they naturally threw the matter of the wings to the back of their minds. Chu Luiyue looked up and indeed saw that the second Tianlei was already rapidly converging. However, she didn't notice that Dumpling, who was in her arms, quietly closed her eyes and covered that dazzling brilliance. Ah! A painful roar suddenly came from behind the crowd. Chu Luiyue frowned and turned around to take a look. This voice, it sounded like Jiang Yuqing's voice? Mu Hongyu and the rest followed her gaze and looked over as well. The nearby forest was in a mess because of the aftermath of the attack. And in the distance, there was no one. Who's shouting? Mu Hongyu asked uneasily. There's no one. Did I hear wrongly? Yi Ranran shook his head. I heard it too. There's indeed someone. It seems to be underground. Underground? Mu Hongyu's expression froze for a moment. Yi Ranran had already looked at Chu Luiyue. Luyu, you heard it too, right? Is that voice coming from underground? Chu Luiyue's eyes flashed slightly. Jiang Yuqing was quite capable. He could actually escape from that situation and come here. Although she didn't know why his voice came from underground, Chu Luiyue still felt very disgusted. She didn't want to know what was going on. She only hoped that Jiang Yuqing could get away and not disturb her here. However, Jiang Yuqing's voice didn't stop, and it was getting closer and closer. Chu Luiyue's mind moved slightly, and a thought suddenly flashed through her mind. It's a moonless and windy night, the time to kill and set fire. Now that the sky was dark, the entire forest was shrouded in a thick layer of shadow, and everyone's vision was inevitably obstructed. In addition, the 9th-grade magical beast was breaking through, and the commotion was huge. Even if something really happened, it wouldn't attract anyone's attention. She stood up. You guys stay here and don't move. I'll go take a look. Digression. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock the comment section had been quite lively these 2 days. February sincerely thanked every original reader. Without them, February wouldn't be here today, and these books wouldn't be here. Not only did they support the original, but they also worked hard for February. They are not only my readers, but also my friends. So, I will always be on this side. Friends who want to read pirated copies, if you have the ability, you can work hard to support the original. You are always welcome. In the end, I still hope that everyone can read happily. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 698. Chang Wanzhou moved and was about to get up and follow her. Chu Luiyue turned around and shook her head gently. Chang Wanzhou pursed his lips and had no choice but to stay where he was. However, his eyes were fixed on Chu Luiyue, as if he was afraid that she would encounter some danger. After all, the mystic forest was indeed very strange along the way. Thinking of the scene he saw before, Chang Wanzhou felt a trace of uneasiness in his heart. Chu Luiyue didn't care about him and continued walking forward. She didn't know if it was due to the influence of the 9th-grade divine beast, but the strange miasma didn't spread here. The forest within the radius still looked very normal. Chu Luiyue stepped on the thick layer of fallen leaves and moved forward. Dumpling jumped onto her shoulder, turned around, and looked at the Tianlei that was gathering in the sky. Chu Luiyue patted it comfortingly. "When we're done here, we'll go back immediately." Not only Dumpling, but she also wanted to continue watching. If it wasn't for Jiang Yuqing, as Chu Luiyue walked, she carefully listened to the direction of the sound. After walking for a while, the sound got closer and closer. Finally, Chu Luiyue stood in front of a tree that was hugged by two people and stared at the ground. It seemed that it was below. On the surface, this place was piled with thick dead leaves, no different from other places. But standing here, she could clearly hear Jiang Yuqing's painful moans coming from below. Chu Luiyue's mind moved and she waved her sleeve. The fallen leaves flew up one after another, and there was a protruding tree root below. It was covered with dust and moss. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to tell what it was. Chu Luiyue listened carefully and was almost certain that Jiang Yuqing was under this tree. "I don't know how he got here," Chu Luiyue thought and knocked on the tree root. Knock knock. Jiang Yuqing's voice suddenly stopped. Clearly, he had heard the voice. Chu Luiyue sneered. According to Jiang Yuqing's cautious and suspicious nature, when he heard this sound, he definitely didn't think of asking for help, but how to avoid danger. Now, even if he was given 10 guts, he would not dare to charge forward. Chu Luiyue knocked twice more. Knock knock knock. This time, Jiang Yuqing was even quieter. Instead, it was the tree roots that slowly moved. Chu Luiyue looked up. The tree beside him was also a Wan Yeshan. "It looks like he wants to leave?" The roots moved and the soil and moss on them fell off. A faint fishy smell filled the air. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. The smell. It smelled a little like blood, and there was also the smell of something rotten. Suddenly, her eyes focused as she looked at the few roots that were pulled out from the ground and exposed to the outside. The thin wall was almost transparent, and it was filled with a red liquid that was slowly surging. It was like blood. Chu Luiyue's pupils constricted. She had seen Wan Yeshan's roots before, but she had never seen such a situation. Chu Luiyue took a deep breath and stared at the tree root that looked like a bloody hand. The scene that she had seen before kept replaying in her mind. That's right. Those Wan Yeshan's roots also seemed to be red. It was just that those trees were not as old as this tree, so the roots were naturally much smaller. In addition, I didn't look carefully back then. Could it be that those tree roots actually look like this? Chu Luiyue took half a step back, pulled out her dagger, and stabbed it into the tree root. A red liquid spurted out. A strong smell of blood instantly rushed over. Chu Luiyue was shocked. It was actually blood. Although it might not be pure blood, it was definitely mixed with a lot of real blood. Otherwise, it definitely wouldn't have such a color and smell. This blood. Where did it come from? Chu Luiyue felt a chill down her spine when she thought of the cold and strange scene she saw when she turned around. Could it be, those people, De Huang Swamp was full of danger, but it was also full of temptation. Every year, countless cultivators came here. However, only a small number of them could survive. The majority of the rest were actually buried in De Huang Swamp. If Wan Yeshan really relied on drinking human blood to nourish himself, what about the lush mystic forest? Chu Luiyue's eyebrows twitched violently. Boom! The second Tianlei slashed down fiercely. Chu Luiyue immediately looked back. The dazzling light was almost blinding. The power of this Tianlei was obviously stronger than the first one. Chu Luiyue narrowed his eyes. He could vaguely see the colors at the bottom of the barrier quickly dissipating and converging toward the top. Finally, it merged into the bright ball of light. This should be the demonic beast absorbing the power of his barrier to resist the Tianlei, right? The barrier's transparent range became wider, but from where Chu Luiwei was, he could still only see a fallen leaf and some rocks inside. Other than that, there was nothing else. Chu Luiwei was slightly disappointed. It seemed that he would have to wait for a while before he could see the demonic beast's appearance inside. Whoosh! The sound of something being dragged on the ground could be heard. Chu Luiwei immediately turned his head and looked at the tree root that he had cut open. The tree root was gurgling with blood. The bright red liquid was flowing in all directions and soon dyed a large area. It looked very terrifying. Chu Luiwei's actions seemed to have stimulated it to a certain extent. It curled up for a moment, and the speed at which it surged became faster. The remaining tree roots were also being pulled out of the ground one after another. The entire tree began to sway, as if it was waiting for the tree root to be completely pulled out of the ground before it ran away. Chu Luiwei's eyes moved slightly. He clenched the dagger in his hand tightly and was about to attack again when he suddenly saw a piece of cloth hanging on the tree root. Although it was stained with mud, it could still be seen that the cloth was very new and very luxurious. That was Jiang Yuqing's clothes. He was indeed below. Looking at the trace of blood on the cloth, Chu Luiwei's lips curled into a sneer. It seemed that Jiang Yuqing was not having an easy time down there. Perhaps this tree root had also swallowed his blood? A familiar aura was getting closer and closer. Chu Luiwei stabbed the tree root again. The tree root twisted even more violently. A large area of the ground was suddenly lifted. Half a figure was suddenly dragged out from below. It was Jiang Yuqing. His upper body was tightly bound by the branches of the tree root. Only one of his arms could still move. His lower body was still stuck in the ground. His body was stained with blood, and he looked very miserable. However, he was still very alert. The moment he came out, he immediately waved the long saber in his hand and slashed towards Chu Luiwei. Chu Luiwei nimbly dodged and said with a smile, "Eldest young Master Jiang, what are you doing?" Jiang Yuqing's movements paused for a moment before he saw the smiling girl in front of him clearly. Chu Luiwei. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 699. Why is Chu Luiwei here? This question quickly flashed through Jiang Yuqing's mind. He only remembered that after he was dragged down, the entrance above was completely sealed. He didn't know what happened to the others. Could it be that he was the only one who encountered this? If not, why would Chu Luiwei be standing here perfectly fine? She didn't seem to have any injuries at all, and her entire body was clean. However, looking at Chu Luiwei's smiling face, Jiang Yuqing couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief in his heart. He looked around. Other than Chu Luiwei, there seemed to be a few other people in the distance. And a huge, colorful barrier. Sensing the terrifying fluctuations coming from the barrier, Jiang Yuqing suddenly realized something and widened his eyes. That's a 9th grade magical beast? There was no other explanation for such a commotion other than a 9th grade magical beast. Chu Luiwei didn't avoid it and nodded frankly. Eldest young Master Jiang has good eyesight. Jiang Yuqing immediately wanted to go over, but he suddenly remembered that half of his body was still buried below and he couldn't break free. Chu Luiwei smiled and asked knowingly, "Eldest young Master Jiang, what's wrong with you?" Jiang Yuqing's face was red and white. When he thought of his current sorry state, his face burned with pain. He couldn't be seen by anyone, but it had to be Chu, and moreover, she looked fine, which made him even more unbearable to look at. Jiang Yuqing had always cared about his face. In the face of such a situation, he only felt embarrassed and wished he hadn't come out from below. He waved the saber in his hand and slashed at the tree roots that were tightly wrapped around him, trying to break free. Only then did Chu Luiwei see that many tree roots had penetrated his body, leaving scars. As expected, this one Yeshan had indeed swallowed Jiang Yuqing's blood. With his current physical condition, how could he withstand such torture? Looking at that ghastly pale face, Chu Luiwei admired his rare miserable appearance for a while, and her mood improved a lot. What was all this? It was not even a tenth of the pain she had experienced. If he couldn't make Jiang Yuqing repay him in every possible way, how could he dispel the hatred in his heart? As if sensing Chu Liyue's strange gaze, Jiang Yuqing finally glanced at her again with a slight frown. Before he could speak, Chu Liyue spoke first. Eldest young Master Jiang, you seem to be seriously injured. Do you need my help? Jiang Yuqing swallowed the words in his throat. For some reason, he felt that Chu Liyue's expression was somewhat subtle. It looked like he really wanted to help. However, his black jade-like eyes were flickering with light, making it hard for others to fathom his intentions. Jiang Yuqing was silent for a moment, then looked at the cut on the tree root and asked, "You did that?" Chu Liyue gently nodded. "I heard a sound here, so I came over to take a look. I just happened to see this tree root moving. I felt that this thing was really strange, so I tried to stab it with a knife. I didn't expect to see eldest young Master Jiang here." Her tone was very sincere. Jiang Yuqing believed her a little. It wasn't easy for him to find a way out. At this time, the force in his body was almost exhausted. He had to get out of here as soon as possible and find a place to recuperate. However, this tree root was really difficult to deal with. As he tried to break free, he asked, "Why are you here? Other than you, who are those people? Where are the others?" The corners of Chu Liyue's mouth curled up imperceptibly. Jiang Yuqing was still worried about her and wanted to ask for an explanation. "Eldest young Master Jiang, it's a long story. Let's wait for you to come out before we talk about it in detail. Why don't I help you? What do you think?" Jiang Yuqing saw that it was really difficult to rely on himself, so he could only nod. Chu Liyue took a step forward. "Just cut off these tree roots," Jiang Yuqing said. Chu Liyue agreed easily and raised the dagger in her hand. As the tree roots moved, Jiang Yuqing's body was also dragged out more. Almost only a pair of legs were left, still buried inside. Chu Liyue glanced out of the corner of her eye. Boom! The third Tianlei fell. A series of loud noises reverberated throughout the entire forest. Layers of dark clouds covered the sky and the sun, and the forest was dark. Chu Liyue deliberately used her body to block Jiang Yuqing. In addition, there were thick tree roots and other objects here, which covered Jiang Yuqing even more. Even Chang Wanzhou, who had been looking over, couldn't see what was happening here. Accompanied by the terrifying aftermath, a dazzling light flickered endlessly. It reflected on Jiang Yuqing's face, half bright and half dark. Chu Liyue stretched out her hand. There was only a step between the two of them at this moment. As long as she waved her hand, the dagger could easily slit Jiang Yuqing's throat. Surging hatred and killing intent surged from the bottom of her heart. A cold light flashed in Chu Liyue's eyes. The blade turned slightly, and the cold light was biting cold. Jiang Yuqing was dealing with a tree root wrapped around his chest and didn't notice this side. All of the grudges, hatred, it could be ended in an instant. Chu Liyue moved her wrist. Crush. Just as Chu Liyue was about to move, a tree not far away suddenly uprooted. It split from the middle. Broken wood splattered everywhere. A figure rushed out. Chu Liyue quickly glanced at it, and her pupils constricted. It was Mu Qinghe. At the same time, Jiang Yuqing was also attracted by the movement and looked over. After seeing the person clearly, he immediately shouted, "Vice Admiral Mu." Mu Qinghe had just broken free from the restraints and rushed out from below. Hearing this, she immediately looked up. The person half buried in the ground was Jiang Yuqing, and the woman beside him. He narrowed his eyes. Why was it Chu Liyue? Sensing Mu Qinghe's gaze, Chu Liyue's expression didn't change. She flipped her palm and stabbed out with the dagger. A section of the tree root was immediately cut off by Chu Liyue. Red liquid splattered. At the same time, a cold wind came from behind. It was the other root of the tree that suddenly rose up. It was aimed at Chu Liyue's back. Her plan was suddenly interrupted. At this time, Chu Liyue was in a bad mood. Sensing this movement, her face turned cold. She quickly turned around and raised her hand. A ball of red flame transformed into a long whip and flew out instantly. The sound of something breaking through the air was heard. The flame whip immediately entangled with the tree root. However, the strength of the tree root couldn't be underestimated. With a fierce struggle, it directly pulled Chu Liyue and caused her to stagger. Chu Liwei simply rolled on the ground, and the force in her body surged out violently. Boom! The flame burned even more fiercely. The entire tree root was instantly surrounded by the red flame. The flame spread rapidly and soon enveloped the entire tree. Chu Liwei coldly spat out a word, "Explode." Bang! The sturdy Wan Yeshan immediately exploded. At this time, Mu Qinghe had already rushed over. With her help, Jiang Yuqing finally broke free. "Eldest young master, are you okay?" Mu Qinghe frowned and asked. Jiang Yuqing didn't answer her. He only stared blankly at Chu Liwei in front of him. Just now, she really saved him. Boom. Chu Liwei looked at the burning flame in front of her, and the hand holding the dagger slowly tightened. What a pity! Digression. There was some delay in the morning. The remaining chapters will be updated at 8 p.m. Updated. Thank you for your understanding. Moi mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 700. Chu Liwei was unhappy, but when she turned around, the expression on her face had returned to normal. Vice Admiral Mu. She greeted Mu Qinghe very politely. It was a pity that she couldn't get rid of Jiang Yuqing directly this time, but thinking about it carefully, she still felt a little reluctant to kill him like this. Wouldn't it be too easy to die with a knife? There's still a long way to go. It's better to let young Master Jiang enjoy his life. As Chu Liwei thought about it, she openly sized up Jiang Yuqing from head to toe, as if she was concerned and sympathetic. Young Master Jiang, I don't think your current condition is very good. Why don't you recuperate as soon as possible? Jiang Yuqing was originally staring at Chu Liwei's back in a daze, but when she spoke, he suddenly came back to his senses. Sensing that Chu Liwei's gaze was sweeping back and forth over his body, Jiang Yuqing felt inexplicably embarrassed in his heart. His battered and exhausted appearance was completely seen by her. He coughed to cover up his embarrassment. "I have medicine." As he spoke, he took out a pill and swallowed it. Mu Qinghe watched from the side. She felt that there was something wrong with Jiang Yuqing, but she couldn't put her finger on it. It was probably because of what he had just experienced. Anyone who had walked around the line between life and death would probably feel some lingering fear. Jiang Yuqing looked at Chu Liwei with a complicated gaze. "Just now? Thank you." For a moment, he almost thought that Chu Liwei wanted to kill him. But everything that happened later proved that this was just a misunderstanding. He had always been a suspicious person and wouldn't easily trust anyone, especially when it was a matter of life and death. Chu Liwei's unreserved help was greatly beyond his expectations. "Young Master Jiang, you're too polite." Chu Liwei smiled faintly, as if she didn't take this matter to heart. Jiang Yuqing was silent for a while before he spoke again. "I owe you one this time." Mu Qinghe suddenly glanced at him, a rare look of surprise flashing through her eyes, as if she hadn't expected him to say this. This person had always been vicious and merciless, cold-hearted and heartless. In the past few years, who knew how many people had sacrificed their lives for him, but he had never once spared them a single glance. Why did he take the initiative to say that he owed Chu Liwei a favor? Could it be that he intended to befriend Chu Liwei? From what had happened during this period of time, Chu Liwei's talent and strength were extraordinary. He was indeed worth befriending. On the surface, Chu Liwei appeared to be very modest. He repeatedly said that he did not dare, but in fact, there was not the slightest ripple in his heart. She had seen Jiang Yuqing's dog-like behavior too many times. In this world, there was probably no one who knew better than her what kind of shocking level this man could bring to two-faced people. When he handed her tea, he always had a gentle and elegant smile on his face, but in the end she found out that under the mask of that smile, it was all poison. Chu Liwei did not take this matter to heart. She treated Jiang Yuqing's somewhat complicated gaze as a joke. In fact, she was more interested in Mu Qinghe. "Vice Admiral Mu, why did you suddenly come out from that side just now?" Mu Qinghe's face was expressionless as usual. "We encountered an accident earlier, and everyone fell into a ravine. It took me a lot of effort to escape." As he spoke, he looked at Chu Liwei and frowned. "Why did you, Lu Yu?" Before Mu Qinghe could finish, he was interrupted by Mu Hongyu's voice. Chu Luiyue looked back and saw that Chang Wanzhou and the rest were actually here. Chang Wanzhou was at the front and was the fastest. Mu Hongyu and Yi Ranran were slightly behind, but they also looked worried. Although Lei Laosi was still guarding there, he kept looking over here. After all, the commotion just now was not small. Chu Luiyue smiled and shook her head. I'm fine. Mu Hongyu and the rest were relieved when they saw that she was indeed not injured. She turned and looked at Jiang Yuqing and Mu Qinghe. Mu Qinghe was fine, but Jiang Yuqing's body was covered in black mud. He was covered in wounds and blood, and his face was pale. He looked very disheveled. Mu Hongyu frowned and covered her nose. What's that smell? It was as if something was rotting, and it was mixed with a thick bloody smell that made one feel nauseous. Jiang Yuqing's face turned from white to green, and the veins on his forehead were still throbbing. Yi Ranran secretly pulled Mu Hongyu and gave her a look. Isn't this smell coming from Jiang Yuqing's body? Wouldn't it be embarrassing for Jiang Yuqing if she said that? Mu Hongyu then realized it and shut her mouth. She glanced at Chu Luiyue. I seem to have offended someone? However, Chu Luiyue's expression was normal, and when he looked back at her, he had a relieved expression. Also, there seemed to be a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Mu Hongyu was a little confused. Luyu doesn't seem to mind this very much. Why do I feel like I'm being affirmed? Mu Hongyu thought for a while and couldn't figure it out, so she threw this matter to the back of her mind. I'll listen to Luyu. If Luyu says it's fine, then it's definitely fine. Chu Luiyue stared at Jiang Yuqing's face a few more times. In the entire Tianling dynasty, who would dare to ridicule Jiang Yuqing in front of him? Only a simple-minded person like Mu Hongyu would do such a thing. Chu Luiyue praised in his heart. Well done. Jiang Yuqing won't be able to put on airs for a long time in the future. Mu Qinghe looked at them and frowned even more. Are you all here? You weren't dragged down? Chu Luiyue nodded honestly. During the riot, my magical beast suddenly ran away, so I chased after it. The rest of them followed me. Later, when we found the magical beast and wanted to go back, we realized that you guys were no longer here. We decided to stay here and wait for an opportunity to meet up with the main group. Chu Luiyue casually brushed the matter aside and asked, Why? Weren't you all together at the beginning? Why did you all split up? Mu Qinghe, Shangguan Wan, Jiang Yuqing, and the others had always been together. Even they had split up, let alone the others. Mu Qinghe's face was a little cold. The situation happened too suddenly. If he didn't have a certain understanding of the mystic forest and knew how to deal with Wan Yeshan, he would probably still be trapped in that swamp. I see. I wonder how the others are now. Chu Luiyue looked around as if he wanted to see if anyone would come out again. Mu Qinghe and Jiang Yuqing didn't say anything. How could they answer this? Based on the situation of the swamp below, it would be difficult to escape. They had just entered the mystic forest, and they had encountered such a thing. It was obvious that more than 1,000 people had died. Mu Qinghe rarely suffered such a big loss, so naturally, she wasn't in a good mood. Boom! Another bolt of heavenly lightning struck. Jiang Yuqing finally came back to his senses and looked up with a serious expression. Is that a 9th grade magical beast that is about to break through? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 701. Jiang Yuqing's tone was filled with bewilderment, but his eyes were filled with unconcealable surprise. It was obvious that he didn't expect that he would end up here after walking on the edge of life and death. He bumped into the 9th grade fiend that was going through Tunlei. Previously, he had been thinking about it, but now that he saw it as soon as he raised his eyes, how could he not be happy? Chu Luiyue nodded calmly. They were already here, and Tianlei kept falling. Even a fool could tell what the situation was now. Jiang Yuqing got up and wanted to walk forward. Chu Luiyue raised his brows slightly. Lei Laosi was guarding over there, and it would be a miracle if Jiang Yuqing could go over safely. With his current ability, he probably couldn't even last 10 moves under Lei Laosi's hands. It was Mu Qinghe who stopped him. Eldest young master, It's very dangerous over there. Let's wait and see first. Jiang Yuqing was a little displeased. Chu Luiwei and the rest came from there just now, but they couldn't go over now? It was already embarrassing enough. If they continued to hide here, wouldn't they seem even more cowardly? Jiang Yuqing didn't listen and continued walking forward. However, he just took 2 steps when a burning pain suddenly came from his lower abdomen. Jiang Yuqing's face turned pale instantly, and he staggered and almost fell to the ground. Mu Qinghe immediately went forward to support him and frowned. Eldest young master, what's wrong? Due to the intense pain, Jiang Yuqing's forehead was filled with sweat, and his lips were trembling slightly. He couldn't say a word. He had felt this a few times before, but it was never as painful as this time. It was as if a flame directly penetrated his lower abdomen and entered his dantian. It was also the first time Mu Qinghe saw Jiang Yuqing like this, and she thought that he was injured by Wan Yeshan's roots just now. Eldest young master, you should rest for a while first. Your body is more important. Even if Jiang Yuqing wanted to refuse, he couldn't say anything now. Chu Luiwei glanced at him indifferently. Jiang Yuqing barely managed to sit cross-legged when he felt the pain quickly disappear. However, the bone-piercing pain lingered in his mind for a long time. A trace of worry and fear finally appeared in Jiang Yuqing's heart. This time, it might be a coincidence. What about twice? What about the 3rd time? There was definitely something wrong with his body. But no matter how he thought about it, he still couldn't figure out what was going on. Back then, that Xia Mu had only used a brush to leave a bloody hole in his body. In fact, it wasn't a serious injury. As long as he recuperated well, he would recover very quickly. However, even after some time had passed, the wound still did not heal. And from time to time, there would be this strange burning pain. However, Jiang Yuqing didn't dare to expose this in front of outsiders. He could only nod briefly and say nothing more. Chu Luiwei suddenly felt a little itchy on her neck. She turned her head and saw Dumpling pulling her hair and wagging its tail, as if it wanted to go back. She didn't know what was over there that made it yearn for it so much. Chu Luiwei patted its head comfortingly and looked at Jiang Yuqing. Eldest young master Jiang, why don't you rest here first? We'll go and see how that 9th grade demonic beast is doing. The 3rd princess came here this time for the divine beast's blood. Wouldn't it be a pity to miss it? Jiang Yuqing wanted to go by himself. However, he really couldn't do anything in his current state. He could only nod and look at Mu Qinghe. You should go with them. Mu Qinghe was stronger, so she would definitely be more confident if she went. Chu Luiwei's eyelids twitched, but she didn't say anything. Eldest young master's body? Mu Qinghe seemed to be a little hesitant. Just go ahead. I know how my body is. Jiang Yuqing's expression became a little more solemn. Mu Qinghe didn't hesitate anymore and immediately agreed. Yes. Chu Luiwei's lips curled up. With Vice Admiral Mu around, we'll be more confident. Mu Qinghe's expression was cold as she followed them forward. Hearing that Chu Luiwei and the rest were back, Lei Laosi turned around to take a look. With this glance, she saw Mu Qinghe, who was following behind the few of them. Murderous intent surged out from Lei Laosi's eyes instantly. I didn't see her earlier, but I didn't expect her to be here. He gripped the hammer in his hand tightly, and the force around him surged. Mu Qinghe seemed to have noticed something and suddenly raised his head to take a look. The 2 of them looked at each other. Mu Qinghe immediately felt the other party's intense murderous intent. It was as though he was going to attack the next moment. He furrowed his brows slightly. Who is this person? Why does he seem to have a deep hatred for me? Before Mu Qinghe could think too much, a figure suddenly walked in front of her and blocked her line of sight. It was Chu Luiwei. Mu Qinghe's gaze landed on Chu Luiwei. However, Chu Luiwei seemed to have no intention of doing so as he shouted at the man in front of him. Big brother Lei. Hearing this, Lei Laosi suddenly returned to his senses, and the murderous aura in his eyes was restrained. However, his expression still looked like he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Chu Luiwei walked to him and smiled. Big brother Lei, don't worry. This is Vice Admiral Mu that I mentioned to you just now. He came with us, and he has no ill intentions. Lei Laosi looked at Chu Luiyue suspiciously. Her words seem like she's trying to hide something? Chu Luiyue then looked at Mu Qinghe and explained, Vice Admiral Mu Qinghe, Vice Admiral Mu Qinghe. Vice Admiral Mu, this is Lei Laosi, Big Brother Lei. He's in charge of protecting this 9th grade fiend. Lei Laosi instantly understood Chu Luiyue's plan. Is she trying to help me hide my identity? It's true that I can't expose myself in front of Mu Qinghe now, but how did Chu Luiyue see through it? Many doubts arose in Lei Laosi's heart. He turned his gaze and fixed it in a certain direction before swiftly retracting it. He took a deep breath and kept the resentment in his heart. Then he glanced coldly at Mu Qinghe and scoffed. Another one who wants to join in the fun? I don't care if you're a lieutenant general or not. All of you stand 10 steps away and are not allowed to come close. Mu Qinghe looked at his ferocious appearance and then at the gigantic colorful barrier behind him as she narrowed her eyes. Why would a human be in charge of guarding a 9th grade fiend? However, this Lei Laosi does seem to have some ability, and he's obviously moving more freely than us in this area filled with terrifying suppression. It's obvious that he's been here for a long time, and he might really be related to that 9th grade fiend. Chu Luiyue smiled and said, Don't worry. Don't worry, we're just here to watch. We won't do anything. Vice Admiral Mu, don't you think so? Mu Qinghe paused for a moment and nodded. Lei Laosi scoffed. Now is the crucial moment, and there mustn't be any mistakes. Mu Qinghe, it's not too late to deal with her in the future. Just as he was about to turn around, his gaze suddenly focused on a figure far away. Who is that person? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 702. Chu Luiyue thought that he saw Jiang Yuqing and was about to speak when she suddenly heard a panting voice from behind. Vice Admiral Mu? Recognizing the identity of the owner of this voice, Chu Luiyue knitted her brows slightly, and a hint of annoyance appeared in the corners of her eyes. She lazily turned around to take a look. It was indeed Elder Qiushi. At this moment, he looked rather disheveled. Half of his body was stained with black mud, and his face was even scratched by something. Fresh blood flowed down, and he looked a little terrifying. He was only slightly better than Jiang Yuqing. Mu Qinghe walked forward. Elder Qiushi, are you here? I didn't seem to hear anything just now. Elder Qiushi hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed his arm as he asked anxiously, What's the matter? He hurriedly asked, Vice Admiral Mu, have you seen the 3rd princess? Elder Qiushi did not deliberately lower his voice when he said this. Chu Luiyue's eyelashes trembled slightly. Murderous intent flashed past Lei Laosi's eyes. The others also quietened down. Mu Qinghe knitted her brows and shook her head. Elder Qiushi was extremely anxious. What should we do? What should we do? Elder Qiushi, don't be anxious. What exactly happened? Weren't you always with Her Highness previously? Elder Qiushi and Elder Duanmu Chun were different from him. The two of them were here specifically to protect Shangguan. Even if Mu Qinghe and Jiang Yuqing weren't with Shangguan, these two elders should be by her side and never leave her side. Elder Qiushi took a deep breath, but his face was still filled with anxiety and nervousness. At the start, we did indeed fall into that gully with the 3rd princess. I'm sure you know what happened down there, Vice Admiral Mu Qinghe nodded. Actually, there were quite a number of people who fell down at the same time, including some of the Black Cavalry and a few sect disciples. However, the swamp below was extremely dangerous. Many people fell into it and never came out again. Originally, we weren't too far away from His Highness. We planned to bring His Highness away, but then, for some reason, the swamp suddenly started to move. Elder Qiushi swallowed a mouthful of saliva with difficulty. When he recalled the scene back then, there was still a sense of horror in his heart. In the end, we were all separated. His Highness is also nowhere to be found. Even he had a hard time seizing the chance to escape. He had only come here because he had sensed the commotion. She immediately spotted Mu Qinghe. Because Elder Qiushi came directly from another direction, he didn't see Jiang Yuqing sitting on the other side in the distance. Vice Admiral Mu, you said His Highness. His Highness. Elder Qiuxi's aged face was filled with worry. That place was extremely dangerous. He didn't know how long Shangguan Wan could last. Mu Qinghe said in a deep voice. Elder Qiuxi, don't worry. Since so many people are here, perhaps some of them are still with His Highness. Moreover, His Highness is blessed by the heavens. Nothing will happen to him. That's right. Her Highness the Third Princess is extremely powerful. Even if she really encounters any trouble, she will definitely be able to deal with it easily, right? A lazy and clear voice suddenly interrupted from the side. Elder Qiuxi looked over in a daze. Only then did he clearly see that the person who spoke was actually Chu Luiwei. Why are you here? Elder Qiuxi felt extremely annoyed when he saw this face, and the expression on his face became much colder. Chu Luiwei felt that it was ridiculous. She seemed to be the first to come to this place, right? Why were these people asking her this question now? Could it be that she, Chu Luiwei, was not qualified to appear here? Chu Luiwei said with a faint smile. Elder Qiuxi, we have been here since the beginning. You were thinking about the third princess wholeheartedly, so it's normal that you didn't see us. However, your expression. Could it be that you feel that what I said just now was wrong? Elder Qiuxi's face instantly flushed red. He knew a little about Shangguan Wan's condition. Hence, when he heard Chu Luiwei's words just now, he subconsciously felt that it was sarcastic. But thinking about it now, what would a Chu Luiwei know? If he admitted it, wouldn't it be equivalent to saying that something would definitely happen to Shangguan Wan? He waved his sleeves fiercely. The third princess will naturally be safe and sound. Do I need you to say that? Chu Luiwei smiled with curved eyes as though she didn't mind Elder Qiuxi's bad attitude at all. Lei Laosi clenched the hammer in his hand tightly and suppressed the emotions in his heart with much difficulty as he turned to look at the colorful barrier. Everyone is really here. If it weren't for the fact that he had to guard this place and boss kept reminding him not to mess around, even if he had to search the entire mystic forest, he would have found Shangguan Wan and the rest and smashed their heads open with a hammer. Chu Luiwei glanced at him lightly. Even if she only saw his back view, she could still feel that suppressed anger. It's really tough for him to hold it in. Chu Luiwei's lips curled up. If there was a chance, she really wanted to have a good chat with Lei Laosi. Mu Qinghe persuaded in a low voice. Elder Qiuxi, since you're here, the third princess should be nearby too. Why don't we use this place as the center and search the surroundings? You might be able to find her. Elder Qiuxi's face was filled with worry. That's the only way. Right, what's that? As he spoke, he raised his finger and pointed at the colorful barrier with a bewildered expression. Just now, he only wanted to find Shangguan Wan and didn't pay attention to anything else. Now that he paid a little more attention, he realized that there seemed to be something wrong with this place. The suppression contained in that colorful barrier was incomparably shocking. The most important thing was that it seemed to have attracted Tianlei. Isn't this? This is the 9th grade fiend that we were looking for previously. Mu Qinghe said softly. Although Elder Qiuxi had already expected it, he was still shocked when he heard it personally. He couldn't help but take 2 steps forward as he stared intently ahead. This is real? He had never seen a legendary fiend before. If this 9th grade fiend could successfully break through, then, Elder Qiuxi, aren't you in a hurry to find the third princess? Chu Luiwei asked lazily. Elder Qiuxi's expression froze. I think I should wait here to get the blood of the legendary fiend. After all, the third princess is here for this. If I miss it, the third princess will definitely blame me. Zap! A black arrow pierced through the air. It went straight for Elder Qiuxi's glabella. At the same time, his furious voice was like a clap of thunder, exploding in their ears. Old thing, you're dreaming. Digression, there's one more update. Around 9 p.m., mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from iYuan. Chapter 703. Elder Qiuxi was shocked and immediately blocked it with his hand. Mu Qinghe raised her arm, raised the scabbard, and blocked that black arrow. Ding! A crisp sound of collision was heard. Mu Qinghe's expression changed slightly. The power contained in this arrow was extremely strong, and it directly numbed half of his arm. However, he didn't block that arrow completely and only caused it to deviate slightly from its original direction. Elder Qiushi was furious, but he didn't have time to execute any other moves and could only grab it with his bare hands. He did grab the arrow, but his palms seemed to be on fire. Elder Qiushi's eyelids twitched harshly, and he couldn't wait to let go of his hand immediately. However, how could he do such a thing with so many people watching? Thus, he could only forcefully endure it and silently swallow this pain. However, the power on that arrow was too strong. After it landed in his hand, it actually didn't stop and was still spinning crazily instead. That arrow actually shot out from Elder Qiushi's hand. As the direction was slightly deviated previously, that arrow still flew over his head and brushed past his scalp tightly. Elder Qiushi felt that his scalp was almost lifted. However, what made him suffer the most right now wasn't the pain in his scalp, but his hand stretched out slightly, and he quickly lowered his head to take a look. His palm was already badly mutilated. Elder Qiushi's heart thumped harshly. If that arrow really passed through my glabella, I'm afraid I'll lose my life. After the shock, there was lingering fear. After the lingering fear, there was anger. Elder Qiushi only felt that his heart and lungs were filled with extreme resentment, which almost made him crazy. He raised his head furiously and glared at Lei Laosi. What about me? Lei Laosi raised his hand, and that arrow turned around and flew back into his hand. He took a look and wiped the arrow on his coarse clothes in disdain before putting it back into the quiver. It was as though it was stained with something dirty. I'm not going to tell you that with me, Lei Laosi, around today, no one can enter this barrier. As Lei Laosi spoke, he glared at Elder Qiushi with a warning gaze. The corners of his eyes were red, and his face was fierce. It was obvious that he was really angry. No one doubted that if anyone dared to step forward, he would immediately pierce through their heart. There was a moment of silence. Even Elder Qiushi, who had suffered a great loss, took a while to react. He opened his mouth, but did not know how to refute. This Lei Laosi's strength is definitely above all of us. Elder Qiushi had a proud personality and liked to compete for everything. However, when his life was in danger, he knew to lower his head and admit defeat. Who asked him to be slightly inferior? Elder Qiushi tried his best to make his expression look natural, but his stiff face still betrayed him, showing his nervousness and fear. How could he be so arrogant? Could it be that this 9th-rank magical beast is your magical beast? Lei Laosi looked at him as though he was looking at a dead man. Looks like you haven't suffered enough just now? As he spoke, he was about to knock another arrow. Elder Qiushi's heart trembled, and he actually took half a step back unconsciously. Chu Luiwei glanced at it, and her lips curled up into a smile. He didn't laugh out loud. However, who couldn't tell the meaning of this mockery? Elder Qiushi instantly felt extremely embarrassed. His old face had been completely lost here. I'd better go and find the 3rd princess first. Then, he hurriedly turned around and left. After walking for a distance, Elder Qiushi's expression still didn't recover. This was the first time he had made a fool of himself. Mu Qinghe looked at Lei Laosi with a deep gaze. Lei Laosi clearly had the intention to kill when he attacked just now. Who exactly is he? Did he attack so viciously because he felt offended or because of other reasons? Boom! Another bolt of heavenly lightning struck. Chu Luiwei turned around and looked intently. This was already the 5th Tianlei. Half of the 9th Tianlei was already gone. The transparent part of the barrier also became wider and wider, almost reaching half of the entire height. However, the strange thing was that no one could see the magical beast's appearance until now. Chu Luiwei looked carefully again, and suddenly, her gaze focused. Hearing her voice, the few of them followed her line of sight. A piece of dried brown tree bark. That seems to be a tree. Yi Ran was the first to speak with sharp eyes. Chu Luiwei actually saw it too. At the center of the barrier, there indeed seemed to be a huge and thick Wan Yesan. At first, they could only see piled up fallen leaves and extended tree roots, but now, they could see a section of the tree trunk. This tree was taller and more majestic than any tree they had seen before. Chu Luiyue took a closer look and realized that even if 5 people hugged the tree together, they might not be able to do it. However, wasn't there a 9th-grade magical beast trying to break through inside the barrier? Why is there a strange tree here? As the light kept flashing above, everyone couldn't see clearly what was inside other than the tree. Fortunately, the colorful light above the barrier continued to converge toward the top. Below, another part of the barrier became transparent. The pressure became stronger and stronger. Obviously, that magical beast had successfully survived the 5th Tianlei. Whoosh! The sound of wings flapping and the sound of the wind suddenly came. A huge shadow was cast on the barrier. Half of the shadow was outlined. Mu Hongyu exclaimed, "That's really a wing. That must be the magical beasts." She couldn't hide her surprise and shouted at Chu Luiyue, "Luyu, what we saw just now is that." Chu Luiyue didn't respond. Mu Hongyu couldn't help but turn to look at her, only to see Chu Luiyue staring at the barrier, her face full of shock. Luyu? What's wrong with you?" Mu Hongyu nudged her arm uneasily and asked softly, "What's wrong?" Chu Luiyue's blood almost froze. She opened her mouth with difficulty. "Did you see the color of that wing?" Mu Hongyu was stunned. "Color? I think it's colorful. What's wrong?" Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. Just now, that half of the wing, she couldn't be more familiar with it. That was the wing of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Digression. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock, mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 704. Chu Luiyue's body stiffened. Only her heart was beating violently, as though it was going to jump out of her mouth. Her mind was blank. Back then, she had been forced into a desperate situation and had resolutely chosen to commit suicide. But before that, she had specially released the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Generally speaking, when the owner died, the contracted magical beast would definitely die along with it. At that time, Chu Luiyue had forcefully removed the contract between them, hoping that her choice wouldn't affect it. However, the situation was critical. Even Chu Luiyue didn't know what had happened in the end. Previously, she had asked around and the news she got was that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant was dead. Even though Chu Luiyue was extremely sorrowful, she had gradually accepted this matter and buried it deep in her heart. Originally, she thought that this matter would forever pass like this and that no one would remember that there was a 9-colored heavenly pheasant in this world that had accompanied her for many years. But now, that half a wing that suddenly flashed past stunned Chu Luiyue. A preposterous thought appeared in her mind. Probably, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant from back then was actually still alive. Chu Luiyue's eyes didn't blink as she stared at the rainbow-colored barrier in front of her. That's right. This barrier is also rainbow-colored. Upon closer inspection, isn't it exactly the same color as the 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Chu Luiyue's hands clenched tightly in her sleeves. Her heart felt like it was being hung by something. Her chest felt empty, but it also felt like it was being crazily squeezed by something. It was so uncomfortable that she couldn't speak. If the 9th-grade magical beast inside is really... But what if it isn't? Chu Luiyue's knuckles turned white. After the surging anticipation and desire, a trace of fear actually appeared. Although the 9-colored heavenly pheasant was rare, there wasn't only one in this world. 2 thoughts were crazily fighting in Chu Luiyue's mind. One was thinking, maybe it is? Maybe I really received pity from the heavens and returned my magical beast to me? The other was thinking, how can there be such a coincidence in this world? If not, then wouldn't I have been happy for nothing? Sometimes, giving people hope and then letting them be disappointed was even harder to accept than not having any hope at all. Chu Luiyue's eyes were dry. Her throat seemed to be blocked by something, and her limbs were cold. She had already lost too much and definitely didn't want to experience such pain again. Mu Hongyu was worried when she saw that Chu Luiyue's expression was off. What's wrong with you? She had never seen Chu Luiyue had such an expression. She seemed to be something. Is she to be to look to the magical beast inside the barrier too? To see, Chu Luiwei lightly shook her head. Li. How do you to her to be to her to be to be to? To be to Mu Hongyu pressed her lips against each other. Seeing that Chu Luiwei didn't seem to want to say anything and that her attention was still on the fiend that was breaking through, she could only swallow her words. Forget it, I'll ask her what's going on later. Suddenly, Mu Hongyu caught a glimpse of Dumpling, who was squatting on Chu Luiwei's shoulder. Her body seemed to have flashed with a colorful light. It was fleeting. Mu Hongyu blinked and took a closer look. She found that the light had disappeared. Dumpling was still the same Dumpling. Her body was furry and blood-red, and she didn't seem to have changed. Maybe I saw wrongly, Mu Hongyu rubbed her eyes. Staring at the colorful barrier, she felt like she was about to start hallucinating. Dumpling quietly leaned against Chu Luiwei's neck. Chu Luiwei didn't look back, but subconsciously patted her body. If she turned her head to look, she would see that Dumpling's eyes were closed. And between her eyebrows, there was a faint flash of light. But Chu Luiwei didn't see any of this. She only raised her head to take a look. Among the layers of rolling dark clouds, the sixth Tianlei had gathered. Now, she was more anxious than anyone else. She couldn't wait for the remaining Tianlei to fall. As long as the colorful barrier faded and became transparent, she would be able to see the situation inside. Also, she wanted to know if the demonic beast that was breaking through inside was what she guessed. The waiting time seemed to be unbearable. Chu Luiwei counted silently in her heart. Finally, boom! The sixth Tianlei fell with a loud bang. Boom boom boom. The power of each Tianlei was stronger than the previous Tianlei. When the sixth Tianlei fell, it even tore the void apart. Behind it, a straight black spatial crack stretched across the sky. It slashed down from top to bottom. Violent energy shockwaves spread out in all directions, sweeping across everything in its path. All the trees in the vicinity were overturned. Even Lei Laosi, who was guarding at the front, was forced back by 3 steps. He cursed in his heart, and the hammer in his hand fell harshly to the ground. A barrier instantly appeared in front of him. He turned back and shouted at Chu Luiwei and the rest. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Are you looking for death by standing so close? I'm supposed to stay here to guard. Why are they joining in the fun? A formless wave of energy surged forth. It went straight for Chu Luiwei. Chang Wanzhou's expression turned cold, and he immediately went forward. A sparrow blue flame flashed past. Boom! The two forces collided harshly. Mu Hongyu immediately pulled Chu Luiwei's arm and wanted to retreat with her. Luiwei, quickly go. This position is simply too dangerous. However, Chu Luiwei suddenly grabbed her hand and pushed it away slowly and firmly. Retreat first. Mu Hongyu was confused. What does that mean? You're not retreating with us, you're still going to stay here? Chu Luiwei stared at the colorful barrier in front of her without blinking. The surrounding light was so bright that it was almost blinding. However, she could still clearly see that the colorful stream of light in the middle of the barrier was fading away quickly. She could already see the extremely thick branches and leaves of Wan Yeshan. Just a little more, Luiwei. Mu Hongyu urged her again and grabbed her hand again. Yi Ranran also persuaded her. Luiwei, Tianlei will only get stronger behind us. Let's retreat for a while first. No matter what Chu Luiwei wanted to do, she had to protect her own life first, right? Chu Luiwei looked at Chang Wanzhou in front of her and quickly ordered in a low voice. Little Zhou, take the 2 of them and leave first. Chang Wanzhou turned around. His delicate eyes were full of shock. Seeing Chu Luiwei's determined expression, he pursed his lips and nodded gently. Since it was her order, he naturally had to obey it unconditionally. Chang Wanzhou quickly moved and pulled Mu Hongyu and Yi Ranran back. The 2 of them were no match for Chang Wanzhou at all. They were taken away just like that. Boom! The 7th Tianlei struck fiercely. Chu Luiwei clenched her fists and took a step forward. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 705. Lei Laosi heard the commotion and turned around to take a look. When he saw Chu Luiwei advancing instead of retreating, he was instantly angered. "Little brat. Are you tired of living?" Other people wouldn't even be able to escape in time, but she actually went forward. She really doesn't care about her own life. However, Chu Luiwei didn't have any hesitation on her face. That pair of eyes that were as deep and bright as black jade was surging with an extremely firm and cold aura at this moment. Lei Laosi was about to scold her again when he saw her expression and was suddenly stunned. That beautiful face was filled with persistence, and there was even undisguised nobility and disdain between her brows. It was as though she was saying that no one in this world could stop her from doing what she wanted to do. This expression, this attitude, this high and mighty aura that made people submit to her, Lei Laosi had only seen it on one person before. The current Chu Luiwei was like a completely different person from that cunning smile from before. For some reason, Lei Laosi suddenly felt that this face in front of him seemed to have gradually merged with a certain face in his memory. He shook his head harshly. Is he crazy? He actually compared Chu Luiwei to Her Highness? But once this thought appeared, it seemed to have taken root in his heart and couldn't be removed no matter what. Just as he was hesitating, Chu Luiwei took another step forward. She was standing 10 steps away from the barrier just now, but she was even closer now. Lei Laosi wanted to persuade her again, but Chu Luiwei suddenly turned her gaze and glanced at him. That glance was extremely light and faint. Lei Laosi suddenly shuddered as though he was nailed to the ground by something. He swallowed the rest of his sentence back. Seems like, that glance just now really seems like it. So much so that for a moment he almost, is that Chu Luiwei crazy? Is she crazy? Elder Qiushi, who had previously said that he was leaving to look for Shangguan, was still standing not far away. He was glaring at Chu Luiwei with a face full of shock and anger. He pointed a finger at Chu Luiwei and trembled like a sieve. Mu Qinghe frowned. Chu Luiwei was her business. What did it have to do with others? Elder Qiushi was so angry because he was worried that Chu Luiwei would be closer to that demonic beast. He was afraid that the pavilion closest to the water would gain the moonlight first. He took a few steps back and said calmly, "Elder Qiushi, if something really happens to her, she can only blame herself for not caring about her own life. Why are you so agitated? Furthermore, didn't you say that you were going to look for the third princess first?" Elder Qiushi was at a loss for words. He wanted to find Shangguan, but the 9th rank magical beast was here. His face flushed red. After a while, he retorted. This old man is worried that Chu Luiwei will ruin things because of his greed. At this moment, Mu Hongyu and the other two had already retreated to the back, and they happened to hear Elder Qiushi's words clearly. Mu Hongyu was already very worried about Chu Luiwei. When she heard this, she was even angrier. "I say, is this Elder Qiushi? What right do you have to say that about Luyu? What do you mean by her greed will ruin things? It's a 9th rank magical beast. What can Luyu do to it? Aren't you thinking too highly of our Luyu?" They were now afraid that Luyu would be in danger, but he was still saying such things. Elder Qiushi said angrily, "Who are you? How dare you talk back to me like this?" Yi Ran kindly explained, "Elder Qiushi, this is Mu Hongyu. She's also the new disciple of Dragon Teeth Mountain's Mountain Master." Elder Qiushi was instantly speechless. In the entire Xiling, who didn't know that Jian Shai was a protective person? If they really angered him, it would really cause a lot of trouble. Elder Qiushi swallowed his anger and was at a loss. He waved his sleeve and rebuked angrily, "No matter who you are, Chu Luiwei is wrong for doing this. If we can't obtain the deity this time." At this point, Elder Qiushi suddenly remembered what happened earlier and immediately felt his palm hurt even more. His lips squirmed twice, and he changed his words. "If we can't successfully complete the mission this time, all the blame will be borne by Chu Luiwei alone. He's really twisting words and forcing logic." Mu Hongyu was so angry that she laughed. Yi Ran's round little face also had a serious expression. Even Chang Wanzhou, who had been looking at Chu Luiwei, turned his head and glanced coldly at Elder Qiushi. Elder Qiushi only felt a chill on his body, and his heart inexplicably turned cold. Yuranren said, "Elder Qiushi, if you're really so considerate of the third princess, why don't you go over yourself now? This way, you don't have to worry about Lu Yu doing anything bad and affecting that divine beast. What do you think?" Elder Qiushi was choked half to death. He huffed and puffed until smoke came out of his head. Finally, he said, "Chu Luiwei alone is already risky enough in the past. How can I go too? The right thing to do is to wait and see." Mu Hongyu sneered. The scene fell into a strange silence. Elder Qiushi also realized that his words were very powerless, and his face turned red and white. Mu Qinghe finally spoke. "Elder Qiushi, why don't you go over there first and see how eldest young master is doing? Perhaps eldest young master has a way to contact the third princess." Elder Qiushi turned around to take a look. Only then did he vaguely see a figure in the distance. That was Jiang Yuqing? Why is eldest young master there? "He's injured and is recuperating for the time being," Mu Qinghe explained. "You can go over and protect eldest young master while you're at it." Elder Qiushi was really speechless. Thinking that it was so embarrassing here, he might as well leave first. Elder Qiushi thought for a moment and put on a worried expression. "How can we let eldest young master stay alone in such a situation? I'll go first." With that, he really left. On the one hand, he didn't want to see Mu Hongyu and the others again. On the other hand, Jiang Yuqing's location wasn't very far from here. If something really happened here, he could quickly rush over from there. Of course, the most important thing was that he felt that Chu Luiwei was just courting death if he went over. It was impossible for him to cause any trouble. Then there was nothing to worry about. After he left, the remaining people finally quieted down. However, Chu Luiwei, who was standing in front, was unaware of this. 2/3 of the area of the huge barrier had become transparent. From where Chu Luiwei was, he could already see the branches of the thick tree. It seemed like there was something on this tree. Chu Luiwei couldn't help but take another step forward. The 8th tunlei suddenly fell. Boom! The bright and dazzling light almost lit up the entire world. Chu Luiwei's sight was filled with white light. Suddenly, in the vast expanse of whiteness, a brilliant stream of colorful light quietly arrived. Almost all the colors on the barrier faded away, leaving only the last circle at the top. A magnificent feather floated down to the ground. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 706. Chu Luiwei's entire body stiffened. Only her heart was beating furiously, as though it was about to jump out of her mouth. Her mind was completely blank. Back then, she had been forced into a desperate situation and had resolutely chosen to commit suicide. But before that, she had specially released the 9-colored sky pheasant. Generally speaking, when a master died, their contracted magical beasts would definitely die as well. At that time, Chu Luiwei had forcefully rescinded the contract between them, hoping that her choice would not affect it. However, the situation had been dire. Even Chu Luiwei herself did not know what had happened in the end. Previously, she had tried to ask around indirectly, and the news she had received was that the 9-colored sky pheasant was already dead. Even though Chu Luiwei was filled with grief, she had gradually accepted this matter and buried it deep in her heart. Originally, she had thought that this matter would pass by forever and that no one would ever remember that there had been a 9-colored sky pheasant in this world that had accompanied her for many years. But now, that half of a wing that had suddenly swept past had completely dumbfounded Chu Luiwei. An absurd idea popped up in her mind. Perhaps, possibly, probably, the 9-colored sky pheasant from back then was actually still alive? Chu Luiwei's eyes did not blink as she stared at the colorful barrier in front of her. That's right. This barrier was also colorful. Upon closer inspection, wasn't it exactly the same color as the 9-colored sky pheasant's body? Chu Luiwei clenched her fists tightly in her sleeves. Her heart felt like it was being hung by something and her chest was empty. However, it also felt like it was being squeezed by something crazily, making her so uncomfortable that she could not speak. If the 9th grade magical beast inside was really, but what if it wasn't? Chu Liuyue's knuckles turned white. After the surging anticipation and desire, a trace of fear actually appeared. Although the 9-colored sky pheasant was rare, there was more than one in this world. Two thoughts were frantically fighting in Chu Liuyue's mind. One was thinking, maybe it is? Maybe the heavens really took pity on her and returned her magical beast to her? The other was thinking, how could there be such a coincidence in this world? If it wasn't, then wasn't she rejoicing for nothing? Sometimes, giving people hope and then letting them down was even harder to accept than not having any hope at all. Chu Liuyue's eyes were dry and her throat seemed to be blocked by something. Her limbs were cold. She had already lost too much. She definitely didn't want to experience such pain again. Mu Hongyu saw that there was something wrong with Chu Liuyue's expression and felt worried. Liuyue, what's wrong with you? She had almost never seen Chu Liuyue reveal such an expression. It was as if she was waiting for something, but also as if she was afraid of something. Was she looking at the magical beasts inside the colorful barrier? Didn't she only see half a wing? Chu Liuyue shook her head gently. I'm fine. How did this look like she was fine? Mu Hongyu pursed her lips. Seeing that Chu Liuyue didn't seem to want to say more and her attention was still on the magical beast that was breaking through, she could only swallow her words. Forget it. I'll ask her what's going on later. Suddenly, Mu Hongyu glanced out of the corner of her eye and accidentally saw Tuanzi, who was squatting on Chu Liuyue's shoulder. There seemed to be a flash of colorful light on its body. It was fleeting. Mu Hongyu blinked and took a closer look, only to find that the light had disappeared. Tuanzi was still the original Tuanzi. Its whole body was furry and blood red. There didn't seem to be any change. Maybe she had seen it wrong. Mu Hongyu rubbed her eyes. She had been staring at the colorful barrier for so long that she felt like she was going to hallucinate. Tuanzi calmly leaned against Chu Liuyue's neck. Chu Liuyue didn't look back, but subconsciously patted its body. If she turned her head at this moment, she would see that Tuanzi's eyes were closed. And between its eyebrows, there was a faint flash of light. But Chu Liuyue didn't see any of these. She just looked up. The 6th bolt of heavenly lightning had already gathered in the layers of dark clouds. Now, she was more anxious than anyone else. She couldn't wait for all the remaining heavenly thunder to fall at once. As long as the light on the colorful barrier faded away and became transparent, she would be able to see what was going on inside. And she wanted to know if the magical beast that was breaking through inside was the same as she had guessed. The waiting time seemed to be particularly hard to bear. Chu Liuyue counted silently in her heart. The 6th heavenly thunder fell with a loud bang. Boom, boom. The power of each heavenly thunder was stronger than the previous one. When the 6th heavenly thunder fell, it even tore through the void. Behind it, a straight black crack in space stretched across the sky. It came down from the top to the bottom. Violent energy ripples spread out in all directions, sweeping across the area. All the trees within the perimeter were overturned. Even Fourth Lei, who was guarding at the front, was forced back 3 steps. He cursed in his heart and smashed the hammer in his hand onto the ground. A barrier instantly appeared in front of him. He turned around and shouted at Chu Liuyue and the others. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and retreat? Were they looking for death by standing so close to him? He was going to stay here and be in charge of guarding. What were they doing here? An invisible wave surged over. It went straight for Chu Liuyue. Chang Wanzhou's expression turned slightly cold, and he immediately stepped forward. A sparrow blue flame flashed past. Boom! The 2 waves of energy collided violently. Mu Hongyu immediately grabbed Chu Liuyue's arm and was about to retreat with her. Liuyue, hurry up and leave. This position was too dangerous. However, Chu Liuyue suddenly grabbed her hand and then slowly and firmly pushed it away. Both of you retreat first. Mu Hongyu had a blank expression. What? What did that mean? You're not retreating with us, you're going to stay here? Chu Liuyue stared at the colorful barrier in front of her. Light shone around them, so bright that one couldn't open their eyes. However, she could still clearly see that the colorful flowing light in the middle of the barrier was fading away quickly. She could already see the thick branches and leaves of the curly fir tree. Just a little bit more, Liwe. Mu Hongyu urged her again and grabbed her hand again. Liwe, the heavenly thunder will only get stronger and stronger. Let's retreat a little first. No matter what Chu Luiwe wanted to do, they had to protect their own lives first, right? Chu Luiwe looked at Chang Wanzhou in front of him and quickly ordered in a low voice. Chu Luiwe looked at Chang Wanzhou, who was in front of him. Chang Wanzhou turned around, his exquisite eyes filled with shock. Seeing Chu Yue's determined expression, he pursed his lips and nodded slightly. Seeing Chu Yue's determined expression, he pursed his lips and nodded slightly. Since it was her order, he naturally had to obey it unconditionally. Chang Wanzhou moved quickly. He pulled Mu Hongyu and Yi ran and retreated. The two of them were no match for Chang Wanzhou. They were taken away just like that. Rumble. The seventh Luiwe struck down ruthlessly. Chu Luiwe clenched her fists tightly and took a step forward. Mobile users, please browse and read. For a better reading experience, please visit the website. Chapter 707. Shangguan Wan hid her aura perfectly, so when she suddenly appeared, no one present actually noticed her existence in advance. So, when her figure entered everyone's sight, it truly shocked everyone. She was stained with a bit of dirt, but it wasn't much. Compared to Jiang Yuqing and Elder Qiushi, it was almost negligible. At first glance, her hair was just a little messy and 2 drops of blood splattered on her face. Right now, she was charging towards the barrier at full speed. She obviously wanted to attack the 9-colored heavenly pheasant that was breaking through. The aura surging around her actually reached a shocking peak 7th grade. Chu Liwe squinted her eyes, and a trace of coldness flashed past the corner of her eyes. Peak 7th grade, Shangguan Wan's Yuan Meridian is crippled now, but she can actually still pretend to have such abilities. It can be seen that she spent a lot of effort. Seeing that she was getting closer and closer to the barrier, Chu Liyue's heart suddenly surged with disgust. Even if this 9-colored heavenly pheasant had nothing to do with her, she wasn't willing to see Shangguan Wan succeed. Shangguan Wan didn't have the right to snatch it from the same clan of fiends that she once contracted with. Other people only thought that Shangguan Wan came for the so-called mythical beast's blood, but Chu Liyue was very clear that her motive for coming here was definitely not just this. Wanting to contract with a mythical beast? Why don't you see if you have the ability and luck to do so? Chu Liyue paused in her footsteps, and a thought flashed across her mind. Lei Laosi, who was standing closest to the barrier, heard the commotion and immediately turned around to take a look. The next moment, he saw Shangguan Wan, who was rushing over aggressively. Lei Laosi was instantly enraged. Great. I haven't gone to look for them yet, but they all came to me one by one. Lei Laosi stomped his right foot harshly on the ground. The tall and sturdy figure immediately flew into the air. His speed was extremely fast. Only an afterimage was left on the spot, but he had already charged in front of Shangguan Wan. At the same time, he drew his bow and shot an arrow. The series of actions was done smoothly. So, the black arrow instantly flew out. He tore through the air and left. Shangguan Wan had actually been waiting in the nearby woods for quite some time. After she was separated from Elder Qiushi and the rest, she was trapped in the same place with more than 10 black cavalry soldiers and 5 to 6 sect disciples. It was also thanks to them that she was able to escape from that damned place. Of course, after she came out, those people would stay in the dirty and rotten swamp forever. After that, she searched aimlessly in the forest, hoping to find someone who was alone. However, it didn't take long for them to hear the commotion. Looking at the Tianlei falling one after another, what else was there to not understand? She couldn't care less about looking for him and rushed over without stopping. After arriving here, she didn't advance rashly. Instead, she waited in the distance for an opportunity to arrive. From her position, she could see Lei Laosi and the group. She even saw Elder Qiushi and Jiang Yuqing who came later. However, out of caution, She did not come out and only waited patiently. At times like this, her mind was usually very sharp. Finally, she arrived at the 9th Tianlei. This was the best opportunity and the only opportunity, because at this time, a 9th grade fiend's defense was the weakest. Hence, she rushed out without hesitation. However, she didn't expect Lei Laosi to be even faster. He actually blocked in front of her. Facing the black arrow that shot towards her glabella, Shang Wanwan's eyes darkened, and she flicked her wrist lightly. A black shield immediately appeared in front of her. Ding! The black arrow hit the black shield harshly and made a crisp sound. The arrowhead actually bent directly. On the other hand, that black shield didn't even have a scratch on it. Seeing the black shield that Shang Wanwan suddenly took out, Chu Luiwei furrowed his brows slightly. On the other side, Mu Qinghe's expression was slightly cold, and a trace of complicated emotions flashed past the corner of his eyes. He didn't expect Shang Wanwan to actually take this for herself. Shang Wanwan scoffed. It's just a small trick. No matter who you are, get out of the way quickly. If you delay my matters, I won't let you off easily. De Huang Swamp was also part of the Tianling dynasty's territory, so her identity was still the most honorable here. Normally, those who were tactful would turn pale with fright and move aside humbly. Shang Wanwan looked arrogant as she looked at Lei Laosi high up in the air, as though she was looking at an ant. However, the scene in her imagination didn't happen. Not only did Lei Laosi's face not reveal any shock or fear, but he became even more ferocious instead. His gaze swept past the black shield in front of Shang Wanwan, and the fury in his heart almost burst through the sky. There's actually such a shameless person in this world. Was this black shield something that she was worthy of? What is this? How dare you behave atrociously here? He put away the bow and arrows in his hands and replaced them with a hammer. Without another word, he raised it high up. The surrounding heaven and earth force rapidly gathered. His knotted muscles tightened, and a vast aura surged around him. It rose crazily. In the end, it stopped at beginner stage 8. Shang Wanwan's heart skipped a beat. This Lei Laosi actually concealed his abilities previously. Beginner stage 8? How can I possibly be his opponent? The two of them were in a stalemate for a moment. At this moment, Chu Liwei was thinking about how to stop Shang Wanwan. Suddenly, a cool breeze brushed past her ears. She was shocked as she saw a red shadow scurrying out directly. It also went straight for that barrier. Dumpling! Chu Luiwei shouted, but she couldn't stop Dumpling. She turned around and followed her without thinking. The aftermath of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant breaking through to become a legendary beast was extremely terrifying. Judging from this smell, this 9-colored heavenly pheasant's bloodline power was extremely rich, and it was basically about to break through successfully. With such a horrible bloodline pressure, Tuanzi would be crushed if she went there. Just as Chu Luiwei followed her worriedly, Lei Laosi also noticed the situation here. Damn it! Both of them are so restless. If Shang Wanwan wanted to barge into this place, he definitely had to stop her, but what was going on with Chu Luiwei? Didn't she want to leave just now? Did she think that she could barge into this barrier safely with her mediocre abilities? Damn girl! Go back. Lei Laosi couldn't hold it in and directly cursed. Seeing that Chu Luiwei didn't listen to a single word and rushed over here without stopping, Lei Laosi became even more anxious. Damn it. That Chu Luiwei is courting death herself. Why am I so anxious? Lei Laosi despised himself in his heart as he shouted in the other direction, "You're too arrogant. Big brother, do something." Shang Wanwan saw Chu Luiwei rushing over here, and her lungs were about to explode from anger. How dare a lowly person dream of becoming a legendary beast? Dream on. She grabbed this gap, turned her feet slightly, and rushed over from another direction. Chu Luiwei could clearly hear the commotion around her. However, she only wanted to bring Dumpling back. A terrifying shockwave carrying a gorgeous radiance suddenly spread out from the barrier. Chu Luiwei's heart tightened. Dumpling! Poof! Dumpling's body flashed, and she actually went into that colorful energy wave. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 708. Tuan Zi's figure disappeared in an instant. That energy that was about to reach Chu Liwei seemed to have been stopped by an invisible hand, and then it quickly retreated. Chu Liwei looked at the empty space in front of her, as well as the barrier with a few faint ripples, and was dazed. What's going on? Not only did Dumpling disappear, but the energy that was halfway dispersed could actually be retracted? Chu Liwei closed her eyes and took a closer look to confirm that she didn't see wrongly. Everything that happened just now was real. Dumpling actually barged in unscathed? She saw clearly that when Dumpling went in, she indeed didn't suffer any threat or harm. It seemed like she went in naturally, as though she entered a place where there was no one. But standing here, Chu Liwei could still clearly feel the valiant suppression from the boundary. Why did it have to be Dumpling? Right at this moment, Chu Liwei suddenly felt a force surrounding her. She furrowed her brows and wanted to counterattack immediately. But the moment she was about to make a move, she suddenly realized something and turned her head to look. A man stood in the forest over there. That man was tall, and his shoulders were straight. Like Lei Laosi, he was wearing a coarse hemp garment. He looked to be around 30 years old and had an ordinary appearance. He was the kind that absolutely couldn't be recognized in a crowd. At this moment, he was looking at Chu Liwei. To be precise, he was looking at the spot in front of Chu Liwei where Dumpling disappeared. His long and narrow eyes were slightly deep, like a deep and quiet well that didn't have any ripples. Chu Liu's heart suddenly skipped a beat. This man's gaze seems a little familiar. This should be the big brother that Lei Laosi mentioned. That man waved his sleeves, and Chu Liu's body moved uncontrollably. In the blink of an eye, she was a few steps away from that man. Then that force disappeared quietly. The two of them faced each other. Chu Liu's heart trembled. This man's ability was definitely not weaker than Lei Laosi and might even be above him. Who exactly were these two people? Why were they guarding a 9-colored heavenly pheasant in this desolate and dangerous mystic forest Lin Jihong? From the color of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's wings, she could tell that it was extremely powerful. There was no need for these two people to stand guard here. Even if it was to ensure sufficient safety when it broke through to become a divine beast, as long as the 9-colored heavenly pheasant gave the order, countless magical beasts would swarm over. Why did they have to pick two humans? Although these two people were indeed very strong, judging from the current situation, these two men were not the master of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Whether it was from the perspective of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant or the two of them, this matter was very strange. While Chu Liwei was thinking about these things in her heart, the man opposite her was also quietly sizing her up. "That blood ferret is your contracted magical beast?" he asked in a calm and slightly hoarse voice. Chu Liwei nodded. Who wouldn't be able to tell? Was there a need to ask? When that man heard that, his long and narrow eyes squinted, and dark waves surged in the bottom of his eyes. Chu Liwei felt that something was amiss. This man seems to be looking at my face? What's so good about my face? Chu Liwei wouldn't think that a person who could reach such a level of ability was swayed by her appearance. He seemed to be looking at another person through her. "That magical beast of yours is a little interesting." He suddenly laughed and said. Chu Liwei couldn't figure out what he meant at that moment. In the end, she simply looked up and met his eyes. "What exactly do you want to ask? Feel free to speak your mind." That man raised his brows slightly as if he didn't expect Chu Liwei to be so direct. He suddenly raised his hand. Chu Liu's expression changed slightly. For some reason, although she knew that this man was very strong to the point that he could kill her with one hand, she didn't feel threatened or uneasy at all. It was as if she was inexplicably certain that he wouldn't hurt her. She had always been a cautious person, and under normal circumstances, she definitely wouldn't have such feelings towards a stranger who suddenly appeared. Chu Liwei looked into his eyes, and a white light flashed across her mind. Wait, could this man be? Even the two of us can't enter this spirit formation. The man in front of her suddenly spoke as his hand brushed past Chu Liu's ear and pointed behind her. Boom! The sound of a violent collision was suddenly heard. Chu Liwei suppressed the thoughts in her mind and turned around to look. Lei Laosi had blocked Shangguan Wan again. The two of them fought hand to hand. They fought head-on. Shangguan Wan was in front, but Lei Laosi was stronger, so the two of them ended up in a draw. Of course, Shangguan Wan wasn't as strong as him, so she quickly fell into a disadvantage and was defeated by Lei Laosi. If it weren't for her black shield, she wouldn't have been able to take it anymore. Seeing that she couldn't take it anymore, Shangguan Wan hurriedly turned around and asked Mu Qinghe and Elder Qiushi for help. Vice Admiral Mu. Elder Qiushi. What are you waiting for? Quickly come and help me. Elder Qiushi only hesitated for a moment and immediately planned to go forward. But just as he took a step forward, a bright light suddenly flashed in front of him. Something brushed past the tip of his nose and fell. A fiery pain came, and Elder Qiushi instinctively took a step back. He looked down and saw a palm-sized metal piece piercing into the ground in front of his feet. If it was slightly wrong, his feet would be in trouble. Elder Qiushi was drenched in cold sweat. It's just an abandoned metal piece, and it has such power. This man's ability is terrifying. Behind Elder Qiushi, Jiang Yuqing was sitting cross-legged. He was regulating his breathing and waited for the excruciating pain in his abdomen to dissipate before he simply dealt with the injuries on his body. The force in his body was also smoothed out smoothly, and he recovered a portion of his ability. Seeing Shangguan Wan coming over, he was a little unhappy, but he didn't show it. He was planning to go forward with Elder Qiushi when he encountered this attack head-on. Jiang Yuqing stood up and looked at the man who suddenly appeared, and his brows gradually furrowed. There are only a handful of people with such abilities in the Tianling dynasty. Who exactly is this person? Boom, boom, boom. An earth-shattering sound came from within the barrier. The last circle of colorful light at the top was rapidly fading away. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the huge barrier finally became completely transparent. The huge and sturdy Wan Yeshan was as tall as a canopy. A beautiful and incomparably noble nine-colored heavenly pheasant was standing on top of it. It was like a dazzling ray of light in the sky. It was very luxurious, and its aura was astonishing. There were some charred wounds on its body that were rapidly recovering. Its aura was also rapidly rising. It was about to break through to become a divine beast. Suddenly, the nine-colored heavenly pheasant slowly lowered its head and looked at Chu Liwei. Chu Liwei seemed to have sensed something and looked up. Their eyes met. Chu Liwei's heart skipped a beat. A shout almost jumped out from his throat. Little Jiao. Digression, my eyes are so dry. But I'm not going to update today. I'll update at 12 tomorrow. I'll update depending on the situation. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 709. Even though time and space had changed, Chu Liwei could still recognize the nine-colored heavenly pheasant when she saw it. It was Little Nine who had accompanied her for countless days and nights. This was an absolute tacit understanding. It was an intuition that could only be formed after experiencing countless life and death situations together. Chu Liwei clenched her fists tightly and her knuckles turned white. Her heart paused for a short while before it started to beat violently. The blood in her body also started to boil. She didn't know how much effort she had spent to restrain her impulse to go forward. However, her eyes were already sour as if something had suddenly surged up and surrounded her. Little Nine. That's my Little Nine. She thought they were separated by life and death. She didn't expect to meet it again in this place. The disappointment and regret from before had all disappeared. What was left was endless surprise and joy. It was as if a flower had suddenly bloomed under the dust and was swaying with the wind. With just a slight movement, all the pain and hardships instantly became insignificant. Chu Liwei didn't even blink as she was afraid that everything in front of her was just an illusion. Suddenly, her gaze stopped and she saw that Little Nine's eyes were actually gray. Chu Liwei was stunned on the spot. That's not right, Little Nine's eyes were usually black. When it used its power, it would change into a gorgeous color. It was never gray. Most importantly, there were no pupils in this pair of gray eyes. At first glance, they looked like two pieces of gray stone, without any spirituality. Although it was also looking at Chu Luiyue, only Chu Luiyue, who was looking at it, could see that the pair of eyes was actually like a dry well. It was lonely and empty without any emotions. After a moment, it calmly retracted its gaze. Chu Luiyue's lips moved slightly and she almost couldn't control herself as she took a step forward. Whoosh! The 9-colored heavenly pheasant suddenly flapped its wings. The wind shook. The leaves rustled. A violent gale spread out in all directions. The people standing nearby were all affected by the shockwave and were forced to retreat. Chu Luiyue wanted to go forward but was pulled back by the man behind her. On the other side, Lei Laosi and Shangguan Wan, who were fighting, also separated. Lei Laosi wasn't paying attention and fell to the ground from the impact. He couldn't help but curse. F***CK. You're heartless. I've worked so hard to protect you. Why don't you go easy on me? But that 9-colored heavenly pheasant turned a deaf ear as if it didn't hear him. It seemed to be angry because the people around it disturbed its breakthrough. Lei Laosi instantly felt a headache. I must be crazy to tell it this. If it listened to his advice, why would he and Big Brother need to watch over it? Previously, it had spent most of its time sleeping. It didn't cause any trouble, and it was fine as long as it was quiet. Now, it was about to break through, and its abilities increased, its strength was changed. Not to mention Lei Laosi, even he was, too. But it was because it was broken, it was because it did it. She used that black shield to block in front of her in a moment of desperation, and it almost blocked most of the power. So, she didn't fall to the ground pathetically like Lei Laosi. She staggered a few steps and barely managed to stand up. She let out a sigh of relief, thinking that the black shield was much more useful than she had imagined. If it wasn't for this thing, she would have died a long time ago. Shangguan Wan looked up at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant again and furrowed her brows. Why did it have to be the 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Previously, she was filled with all sorts of fantasies about this 9th-grade fiend, but she didn't expect it to be the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. If it were any other 9th-grade fiend, she wouldn't have any problems. Except for this 9-colored heavenly pheasant. This was Shangguan Yu's fiend when she was alive. This made Shangguan Wan feel a little uncomfortable. But she couldn't care so much now. Taking advantage of the fact that this thing hadn't completely broken through to become a legendary fiend was the best way to do it. Shangguan Wan burned the force in her body crazily, tapped her toes, and flew up again. She went straight for the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. As long as she plucked out the red feathers on its head, she could subdue it and become its master. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant tilted its head and glanced at Shangguan Wan. Just as it was about to attack again, its vision suddenly landed on the black shield in front of Shangguan Wan. There was a moment of hesitation in its actions. Shangguan Wan was elated. This 9-colored heavenly pheasant doesn't seem to be so hostile towards me. Or perhaps, its brain hasn't turned around yet, and it actually allowed me to get close to it. Perhaps the heavens are destined to let me obtain a legendary fiend. Shangguan Wan was agitated, and because of her excitement, the corners of her eyes were red. In the blink of an eye, she was already in front of that barrier. Ripples suddenly appeared on the transparent barrier. A terrifying aura gradually gathered and condensed into a wave that spread towards Shangguan Wan. Shangguan Wan had witnessed how powerful this barrier was, so she raised the black shield with lingering fear and completely hid her body behind it. Buzz! The shockwave slammed heavily into the black shield. It let out a distant and heavy sound that spread far and wide. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant looked over here and still stared at the black shield closely. It tilted its head slightly and seemed to be thinking about something. That terrifying power shook Shangguan Wan's arms that were holding onto the black shield until they were completely numb. Just as she was worried about what she should do next, she suddenly felt that heavy pressure disappear. She looked up and saw that the ripple was flowing along the black shield to both sides. An entrance suddenly appeared on the barrier. My chance is here. Shangguan Wan was elated and immediately rushed into that entrance without thinking. Lei Laosi was so angry that his liver hurt when he saw this scene. Does this dumb thing know who that is? Why did it become so dumb after waking up from its sleep? Is it blind? Chu Liyue's heart seemed to be stirred by something. Shengguan clearly relied on that black shield to be able to go over. Little Nine didn't seem to remember her anymore, but it still had an inexplicable longing for her things. Chu Liyue clenched her teeth and also rushed over. This time, the man beside her didn't stop her and just stood with his hands behind his back as he watched Chu Liyue rush over. His long and narrow eyes squinted slightly as if he was in deep thought. Chu Liyue was too fast and actually followed Shengguan into that entrance. Lei Laosi exclaimed, "Stupid girl, you're crazy. Come out quickly. That isn't a place that she can enter." Chu Liyue didn't turn back. She looked up at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant also noticed her arrival. It flapped its wings, and a rainbow-colored stream of light wrapped around Chu Liyue tightly like a rope. Shengguan turned back and scoffed. "You're overestimating yourself." Chu Liyue felt as if her organs were being squeezed together harshly. She couldn't breathe, and her face rapidly flushed red. Her vision also turned black. However, she only looked at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant stubbornly. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant seemed to sense something and finally looked over again. Chu Liyue's nose felt sour, but there was a smile at the corner of her lips. She opened her mouth and said silently, "Little Nine, it's me. Little Nine, it's me." Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 710. Xiaojiu, it's me. There wasn't any sound. Just this silent sentence was enough to shake the heavens and earth. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant's gray eyes seemed to crack instantly. A trace of shock surged out from its eyes. The colorful flowing light that was tightening around Chu Liyue suddenly stopped. She looked up at it. That pair of eyes that were as calm as an ancient well finally had some ripples. Confusion, astonishment, shock, disbelief, many complicated emotions surged up one after another. They intertwined together. Right at this moment, a red furry figure quietly scuttled up the tree trunk and arrived beside the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's red claws. It turned around and saw that Chu Liyue was still trapped in that colorful flowing light. Dumpling gritted her teeth angrily and bit the red claws next to her. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant was in pain. It lowered its head and looked at Dumpling innocently. Dumpling bared her teeth fiercely. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant lowered its head, feeling wronged. Shengguan originally wanted to watch a good show, but she realized that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant suddenly stopped. She turned around and followed its line of sight. Then she saw the blood ferret beside the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's feet. Shengguan frowned. Isn't that Chu Liyue's fiend? How did it barge in and get so close to the 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Isn't it afraid of the bloodline suppression? And it actually dared to bite the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Trying to break a rock with an egg. You're courting death. Shengguan sneered. Sure enough, like master, like magical beast. Chu Liyue was someone who didn't care about her life, and her fiend was even more so. Just like that, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant could easily crush it to death. Sensing Shengguan's gaze as if she was looking at a joke, Dumpling immediately glared back fiercely. What are you looking at? I'll even bite myself when I'm crazy. Chu Liyue also saw Dumpling. When did it run over there? She was planning to call Dumpling back, but she saw that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant had already flapped its wings and used a colorful ball to surround Dumpling. Dumpling floated up gently. In the end, it actually reached the top of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's head. Chu Liyue frowned and shook her head at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Can't do that. Dumpling is also her fiend. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant glanced at Chu Liyue before it directly opened its beak and swallowed the colorful ball. Then, it slowly closed its eyes. Dumpling. Chu Liyue exclaimed to Dumpling. Xiaojiu really ate Tuanzi? Shengguan watched from the side, feeling happy. sheet to chew of it to choose it heavenly heavens to be two of her to be to her twos to be to the bee. Young Mistress Chu, the inside of this barrier is the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's territory. Ordinary people can't enter. Your fiend is just a 3rd-grade blood ferret. How can it withstand the 9-colored heavenly pheasant suppression? As I see it, you should quickly leave as well. Otherwise, even I might not be able to protect you. Chu Luiwei glanced at her coldly. Shangguan was indeed Shangguan. She could still show such fake concern at such a time. Didn't she find it disgusting? Chu Luiwei took a deep breath and realized that the connection between her and Dumpling hadn't been cut off, which meant that it was still alive. She felt more at ease. Dumpling wasn't an ordinary blood ferret. Since it dared to come here, it definitely had the ability to protect itself. Why don't I call little 9 back and ask it to spit out Dumpling? Chu Luiwei asked plainly. It seems like 3rd Princess is confident in subduing this 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Shangguan's eyes were filled with unconcealable delight. That 9-colored heavenly pheasant obviously treated her differently. It might have already chosen her as its master. It was naturally different from others. Contracting a fiend, especially a high-grade fiend or even a divine beast, depends on fate. Since this 9-colored heavenly pheasant has chosen me, then, boom. A shocking aura suddenly exploded from the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's body. Gorgeous red flowing light spread out from its feathers and quickly healed the scars caused by Tianlei. At the same time, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant suddenly flapped its wings and flew up. It spread its wings and its body was so huge that it almost covered the sky. In the next moment, it changed its direction and flew towards Shangguan. Shangguan was nervous and happy. Is it going to recognize me as its master? Her heart thumped and the blood in her body flowed rapidly as though it was about to boil. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Once it breaks through, it will become a divine beast. By then, everyone in the Tianling dynasty will know that she, Shangguan, has contracted a divine beast. Shangguan Yu is so powerful, but didn't she only contract a 9th-grade fiend? As long as today's matter is successful, everyone will know that I, Shangguan, am 100 times stronger than Shangguan Yu. Countless scenes appeared in Shangguan's mind, causing her to tremble in excitement. She took a step forward. As long as I can contract, swoosh. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant swooped down, stuck close to Shangguan, and flew over her head. At the same time, its sharp claws scratched Shangguan's arm. Blood flowed from the wound, and it was so deep that her bones could be seen. Shangguan was caught off guard. She exclaimed and uncontrollably took a few steps back. She looked at her arm in a panic, but she didn't have time to check her injury. That was because the black shield had been snatched away. Shangguan hurriedly looked up and saw that the black shield was being held tightly by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. She was about to chase after it when she suddenly felt a sharp pain on her arm. She lowered her head, and her eyes immediately widened in horror. She saw a few streaks of colorful flowing light at the edge of the scratches. The colorful flowing light looked gorgeous and magnificent, but in fact, it was wrapped in a terrifyingly high temperature. When it swam back and forth, it was as though it was being roasted by flames. What was even more terrifying was that Shangguan realized that her wound was expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. The wound that was already deep enough to see the bone was continuously torn apart by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's power. Intense pain came, and Shangguan's mind went blank from the pain, and she almost fainted. Ah! She screamed hysterically and fell to the ground, curling up into a ball in extreme pain. No, no! A muffled moan came out of her mouth, and it was filled with deep fear. No one knew that the force in Shangguan's body was being devoured crazily, and that colorful flowing light had already spread to her shoulders. Looking from afar, both of her arms were already festering, and it was very terrifying. Chu Luiwei looked at her and narrowed her eyes. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant's attack just now was a mixture of its and Tianlei's power. Shangguan naturally couldn't withstand it. She looked up at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant that was flying in circles in the sky. Little 9 was targeting Shangguan like this. Could it be that it thought of something? Right at this moment, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant suddenly let out a clear cry. Screech! The clear and melodious cry resounded throughout heaven and earth. One of the colorful feathers on its wings suddenly transformed into a scarlet-red color. Chu Liwei suddenly felt as though something in her body had been stirred up. A moment later, a tinge of shock flashed across her eyes. That was Dumpling's aura. Digression: the rest of the third night watch will be updated at 6:00 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 7:11. Chu Liwei almost couldn't believe it. She checked again carefully and realized that Dumpling's aura was indeed changing along with the changes on the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's body. A bold and absurd thought suddenly appeared in Chu Liwei's mind. Could it be that Dumpling and Little 9? Gradually, the colorful feathers turned crimson red. It was like a burning flame that swept across. Chu Liwei couldn't be more familiar with such a red color, because it was exactly the same color as Dumpling's body. Recalling the scene where Dumpling was wrapped in a ball and swallowed by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant, Chu Liwei's eyes flickered and her emotions fluctuated. As the crimson colors appeared, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's aura also rose crazily. Under the dark sky, it was the most dazzling existence. Chu Liwei looked up and countless scenes flashed across her mind. The first time she saw Dumpling was in the forest outside the imperial city. It came out from a pile of fallen leaves and seemed to have slept for a long time. It followed her while swaying. She didn't plan to bring a blood ferret with her at first. However, it was very persistent and stuck to her like a little tail. Then she met the black flying python. Dumpling blocked in front of her without hesitation. Even though its small body was not even as big as one of the black flying python's eyes, it still rushed forward. It didn't care about anything else and charged forward. It was covered in wounds, but it never regretted it. After that, they accompanied each other day and night, and they followed each other through life and death. Speaking of which, it could be summarized in 2 or 3 sentences. However, only she knew how much was involved and what kind of meaning it had. She didn't feel it back then, but now that she thought about it, there were traces everywhere. In this world, how could there be a magical beast that would willingly give up its life for a complete stranger without any scruples? It often slacked off and acted coquettishly. It liked to fight with the red demon. It trusted and relied on her completely. Chu Liwei couldn't help but laugh, but the corners of her eyes were wet. A teardrop silently slid down her cheek and disappeared into her hair. The aura that kept increasing in her body was unfamiliar yet familiar. It was Dumpling. It was also Little 9. After going around in circles, it had always been by her side. Shangguan tossed and turned in pain and kept moaning in pain. Third princess. Everyone outside the barrier also saw the situation here. They all fell into a great shock and were silent for a long time. Shangguan's cry of pain finally made them come back to their senses. Elder Qiushi hurriedly rushed over, if he really couldn't explain himself. However, as soon as he reached the barrier, he ran into a dilemma. How was he going to get in there? Shangguan and Chu Liwei could only enter because an entrance appeared on the barrier. But now, the entrance was sealed. The huge transparent barrier glowed faintly and had an extremely strong aura. With his current strength, it was impossible for him to force his way in. He looked at Mu Qinghe, who was standing at the side and didn't say much. Vice Admiral Mu, do you have a way to enter this barrier? The third princess is in a bad situation. If we don't save her as soon as possible, I'm afraid. Mu Qinghe was looking at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant in the barrier and frowned. This 9-colored heavenly pheasant. It didn't look like that one, but why did he feel an inexplicable sense of familiarity? Hearing Elder Qiushi's words, he turned his gaze and thought for a moment. He said in a deep voice, even if we work together, it should be very difficult to open this barrier. Unless That nine-colored heavenly pheasant is willing to let us in. He was close and saw clearly just now that Shangguan could go in because the barrier was opened by herself. Elder Qiushi was very anxious. Then what should we do? Could it be that we are just going to watch and do nothing? Jiang Yuqing pursed his lips. Suddenly, Jiang Yuqing's voice came from behind. Ask Chu Luiyue. Elder Qiushi and Mu Qinghe turned around at the same time. Eldest young master, you mean? Elder Qiushi was confused. After this period of rest, Jiang Yuqing had more or less recuperated his body. He lifted his chin. Didn't Chu Luiyue go in too? But eldest young master, she just took advantage of the situation and followed the third princess in. Why, that nine-colored heavenly pheasant hasn't launched a fatal attack on her until now. Isn't that enough to explain the problem? Jiang Yuqing glanced at Elder Qiushi coldly. Elder Qiushi was stunned and immediately understood. That's right. Although Chu Liu's fiend was eaten by that nine-colored heavenly pheasant, she was still standing there perfectly fine. Other than the time when the nine-colored heavenly pheasant attacked her at the very beginning, it seemed to have treated her as if she was invisible. And the only time it attacked her, it didn't cause any substantial damage to Chu Luiyue. Instead, it was Shangguan. He thought that she could form a contract, but he didn't expect her to lose half of her life in the blink of an eye. After understanding this, Elder Qiushi finally understood Jiang Yuqing's intention. However, he was still in a difficult position. Eldest young master, you might not know this, but that Chu Luiyue is stubborn and has some opinions about me. He definitely wouldn't get any results if he went to ask. The last general can just go. Mu Qinghe suddenly spoke. Jiang Yuqing nodded. Elder Qiushi secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Mu Qinghe turned around and walked toward Chu Luiyue. Actually, other than that barrier, the distance between the two of them wasn't considered far. However, to Mu Qinghe, her legs seemed to be filled with lead, and each step was heavier than the previous one. There seemed to be a huge rock pressing down on his heart, making him unable to breathe. His mind was in a mess. Nine-colored heavenly pheasant? Is that nine-colored heavenly pheasant? Lei Laosi didn't feel good after seeing Chu Luiyue enter with Shangguan. He and Big Brother had guarded this place for so many days and nights, but they couldn't enter this barrier. Yet, those two entered so easily. How can this be? However, when he had nowhere to vent his anger and even started to consider quitting, he saw that nine-colored heavenly pheasant attacking Shangguan. Seeing Shangguan lying on the ground with her arms festering in pain, Lei Laosi finally vented his anger. Great. Right now, Big Brother and I still can't do anything to Shangguan and the rest openly, but who can object to this nine-colored heavenly pheasant attacking? I didn't watch over you for nothing. Lei Laosi felt good as his gaze landed on Chu Luiyue again. That's strange. Why is this girl completely fine? He looked at his big brother and was about to ask for his opinion when he saw him staring at Chu Luiyue with an obscure gaze. Lei Laosi's heart skipped a beat, and he limped over. Big brother, what are you thinking about? That man's lips slowly curled up. I'm thinking that we shouldn't continue to wait. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 712. Lei Laosi was stunned as he looked at him in disbelief. What? Big brother, you mean? Immediately after, Lei Laosi suddenly thought of something and quickly looked up. Right? The nine-colored heavenly pheasant only started to transform into a legendary beast after swallowing that blood ferret. Could it be Chu Luiyue? Lei Laosi turned his gaze and looked at the young lady in red standing inside the barrier. She was slender, and her shoulders were thin, but her back was very straight. The wind and clouds moved around her, but she stood proudly as though nothing in this world could make her bend her back. He suddenly recalled Chu Luiyue's gaze when she said that she wanted to enter the barrier. So determined. So persistent. So unparalleled. That blood ferret was her contracted fiend, and from what she said, it was indeed that blood ferret that brought them here. The most important thing was that the nine-colored heavenly pheasant had already tried to kill Shangguan, but it didn't hurt Chu Luiyue at all. With so many clues added together, It was enough to prove one thing. Chu Lei Laosi was agitated, and his hand that was holding the hammer trembled slightly. As he stared at Chu Liyue's figure, he tried his best to control his emotions and lowered his voice. "Big brother, are you sure? This is a serious matter, so I have to be very careful." That man's smile deepened slightly. "Just watch." Lei Laosi's heart was scratching. "But what do you mean by, just watch? Is it true or not? Give me a definite answer." But that man wasn't willing to say anything else. Lei Laosi could only restrain himself. No matter what the result was, he just had to wait for the 9-colored heavenly pheasant to complete its breakthrough. Mu Qinghe walked to the front of the barrier. The turbulent and powerful suppression was like a small mountain pressing down on his body, making it difficult for him to take every step forward. Even the force circulation in his body slowed down. But he still got close to where Chu Liyue was. Before he could speak, Chu Liyue turned around as though she sensed something. Her eyes were bright, clean, and deep like black jade. Mu Qinghe choked on his words. "How did you go in?" Chu Liyue raised her brows slightly. "Didn't Vice Admiral Mu see everything that happened just now? I followed the third princess in." Mu Qinghe paused for a moment and said straightforwardly, "Do you have a way to help us go in? Or, you can send the third princess out." Anyone could tell that it was impossible for Shangguan to subdue this 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Moreover, it was about to break through to become a divine beast. By then, it's Qinghe. She's Qinghe. Chu Liyue glanced at Shangguan, knitted her brows, and hesitated. "Lieutenant Mu, do you think that I have such an ability?" "You probably forgot that my fiend was also swallowed by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. I can't even go out now, so I naturally don't know how to send the third princess out." "Why should I send her out? Isn't it good for her to stay here?" Shangguan is greedy. She wants to occupy the 9-colored heavenly pheasant, but she didn't think about where she got the right to do so. Mu Qinghe's expression was solemn. "Is there really no way?" Chu Liyue suddenly laughed. "I couldn't tell that Vice Admiral Mu is really loyal to the third princess." Mu Qinghe's heart suddenly felt like it was stabbed by something. "But I'm very sorry. I really don't have this ability. Why don't you ask those two?" Mu Qinghe knew that Chu Liyue was talking about Lei Laosi and the other two. Not to mention whether they would help, even if they were willing, those two probably wouldn't be able to do it. Otherwise, Lei Laosi wouldn't be in such a sorry state just now. Screech. A clear screech was heard once again. Chu Liyue immediately turned back to take a look. Currently, half of the feathers on the 9-colored heavenly pheasant had already turned crimson red. Splash, its huge wings suddenly vibrated. In an instant, the wind and clouds surged. The huge Wan Yeshan swayed with the wind. An incomparably thick tree root suddenly rose up from the ground. It slammed toward Shangguan. This tree was the biggest tree in the entire Mystic Sun Forest, and its root naturally couldn't be underestimated. That tree root was so thick that it would take 2 people to wrap their arms around it. Also, it was crystal clear and filled with blood-red liquid. A strong smell of blood spread across the place. Everyone's expression changed simultaneously. Needless to say, Jiang Yuqing and the rest had personally experienced how powerful this tree root was. "Third princess, want to..." That tree root was about to land on Shangguan. At this moment, Shangguan suddenly seemed to have realized something and looked up. When she saw that thick tree root flying toward her, fear flashed across Shangguan's face. Immediately after, she seemed to have made up her mind, and a ruthless glint flashed across her eyes. "I can't care so much anymore." The next moment, Shangguan's aura suddenly surged. She quickly got up and left an afterimage on the spot. Bang! That tree root ruthlessly slammed onto the spot where Shangguan was just now. Countless cracks instantly spread out on the ground. A deep gully appeared in a split second. Shangguan's afterimage was also instantly shattered. However, she was still able to avoid this attack. Chu Liyue immediately looked over, and his eyes narrowed dangerously. Shangguan's aura was actually still surging rapidly. She was only at peak stage 7 just now, But she actually broke through to stage 8 right now. She reached the same stage as Lei Laosi. A chilly aura emanated from Shengguan Wan's body. In an instant, her face and body were actually covered with a thin layer of frost. Shengguan Wan indeed still held back previously. Just as Chu Luiwei was thinking, he saw Shengguan Wan raise her hand. A sharp white icicle suddenly appeared in her hand. However, in the center of that white icicle, there seemed to be a drop of crimson blood. The terrifying aura was emanating from that drop of blood. Chu Luiwei's heart shuddered. That blood was swoosh. Shengguan Wan had already taken action. She ruthlessly stabbed that icicle into the tree root in front of her. Then she slashed it forcefully. Rip, blood splattered everywhere. Shengguan Wan's face and body were instantly covered with scarlet bloodstains. It looked eerie and terrifying. However, an even more terrifying scene appeared next. Those bloodstains that splattered on the icicle were actually rapidly absorbed by the icicle. All of them gathered into that drop of blood in the center. From afar, the color of that drop of blood in the center seemed to have become even denser, and it even faintly turned black. Shengguan Wan happened to be holding onto the center of that icicle, so this scene was only seen by Chu Luiwei, who was standing nearby. Chu Luiwei only felt a chill run up from the bottom of his feet. There's something wrong with that icicle. Her gaze shifted slightly, and she looked at Shengguan Wan again. However, she shockingly discovered that her injuries were recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. Mobile users, please browse and read. A more high-quality reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 713. At this moment, Shengguan Wan completely ignored the gazes of the outside world. She held the icicle and looked at the blood-red liquid flowing all over the roots in front of her. She was pleasantly surprised. The thick smell of blood spread, and it was nauseating. However, this smell made Shengguan Wan even more excited. This Wan Yeshan indeed lives by consuming human blood. The biggest one in the middle should be the mother tree of all the Wan Yeshan in the mystic forest. If I control this Wan Yeshan, doesn't that mean all those people who are still trapped underground will be mine? This would be many times more convenient than my previous plan. Screech. A painful shriek was heard. Chu Luiwei quickly looked up and saw that the remaining half of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's feathers didn't turn red for a long time. Even the parts that had turned red started to turn back to their original colors. Chu Luiwei's heart sank harshly. Could this be the sign of a failed breakthrough? It hovered in midair and flapped its wings anxiously. Chu Luiwei clearly saw that the red color on one of its wings that had just transformed was gradually fading. The most important thing was that the rolling dark clouds in the sky were also showing signs of dissipating and were gradually drifting in all directions. Even if Chu Luiwei hadn't seen the scene of a 9th-grade fiend breaking through to a mythical beast, he knew one thing. Under normal circumstances, the phenomenon would only disappear after a successful breakthrough. But now, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant was only halfway through its breakthrough, and it actually started. This could only prove that Chu Luiwei's guess wasn't wrong. He didn't know what problem the 9-colored heavenly pheasant encountered, but it was stuck at this last stage. If it couldn't successfully break through to become a mythical beast this time, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's abilities would decrease greatly. There was even a possibility that it wouldn't be able to break through to become a mythical beast in this lifetime. Chu Luiwei's heart sank to the bottom of the valley. Big brother, what's going on? Is that fellow going to fail? The others below also noticed that something was amiss, and their expressions changed. A hint of panic flashed past Lei Laoxi's eyes as he looked at his big brother. How could this be? For such a long time, we have been watching carefully, not leaving each other's side at all. There have been no mistakes at all. Logically speaking, it should be able to succeed. One must know that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant had been in a deep slumber for close to 2 years. It was its own choice to break through to Divine Beast today. If it didn't have absolute confidence, it wouldn't have done that. Nothing is absolute. The man's expression was calm as his long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly. The probability of a 9th-grade magical beast successfully breaking through to become a divine beast is actually less than half. Besides, moreover, this 9-colored heavenly pheasant was very different from other 9th-grade magical beasts. Lei Laosi was speechless, and his face was a little pale. This is that person's magical beast. How could her magical beast fail? Back then, the fact that it was able to survive in such a desperate situation was already enough to explain many things. At the very least, he had never thought of a second possibility other than success. Let's wait and see. The dark clouds haven't completely dispersed yet. Until then, there was still time. Lei Laosi held the hammer in his hands tightly and looked up anxiously. Anyway, I think it will definitely work, he muttered to himself as if he was convincing himself and also as if it was some kind of firm obsession. Why is the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's color changing back again? Mu Hongyu exclaimed. Yi Ranran furrowed his brows, and his face was solemn. I'm afraid, not good. How can it be so easy to break through to become a divine beast? You're saying that it's going to fail? Mu Hongyu was still in disbelief. That 9-colored heavenly pheasant was clearly fine just now. Could it be that even such a powerful 9th-grade magical beast couldn't successfully cross that threshold? The golden mane bear cub suddenly appeared in Mu Hongyu's arms again. Mu Hongyu's arms sank, and she hurriedly hugged it. Song, what are you doing? She thought that it was frightened by the commotion, but after the golden mane bear cub came out, it just stayed in her arms obediently and looked at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant in the sky with a nervous expression. Mu Hongyu didn't understand what was going on. Why does Song look like? Not only is it not afraid, but it's also very worried about that 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Mu Qinghe also looked up, but he quickly retracted his gaze and looked at Shangguan again with a solemn expression. When Shangguan attacked just now, there seemed to be something wrong. Your Highness. The moment he spoke, he heard a gust of wind by his ear. A green figure flashed past his eyes rapidly. He was shocked. Hong Yao. Hong Yao turned around and glanced at him, but it didn't stop. While green flames quickly ignited on its body. Its aura increased rapidly. Mu Qinghe's expression changed slightly. What is it planning to do? Hong Yao. Come here. He scolded sternly. Hong Yao flapped its wings and flew toward the 9-colored heavenly pheasant that was hovering in midair. Mu Qinghe was about to chase after it when he suddenly heard a loud sound. Boom. He turned around and saw that the ground in front of Shangguan had suddenly collapsed. The ravine was so deep that the bottom couldn't be seen. Jiang Yuqing also noticed the commotion here. His expression changed drastically, and he immediately went forward. At this moment, a tree root swept over. Shangguan actually jumped down. Your Highness. Want to? Shangguan's figure instantly disappeared in front of everyone. It's so dangerous down there. Why is she still going down? Almost at the same time, Chu Liue tapped her toes and shot into the sky like an arrow. She was actually going for the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Lu Yu. Mu Hongyu and the rest were shocked. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant was about to fail its breakthrough, and its aura was already surging. Wasn't she courting death by going over at this moment? Chu Liue turned a deaf ear to these voices. She suddenly raised her aura, and her speed became even faster. At this moment, only the area around the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's head was left red. The rest of its body had turned colorful again. However, although it was colorful, it was very different from the luxurious and beautiful appearance from before. Upon closer inspection, its body seemed to be covered with a layer of dust. Its entire body was gray and lifeless. Chu Liuyue's heart felt as if it was pierced by a sharp blade. It was painful. She gritted her teeth and charged over without a care. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant seemed to have sensed someone approaching and flapped its wings alertly. The fierce and chaotic power transformed into streams of light and scattered in all directions. Many wounds were quickly left on Chu Liuyue's body. However, she was still moving forward. She directly arrived in front of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Screech. The nine-colored heavenly pheasant flapped its wings and instantly surrounded Chu Liyue's figure. A vast and mighty pressure descended. A chilling, murderous aura enveloped her. Chu Liyue's clothes and long black hair fluttered in the wind. The biting cold aura approached, and its sharp claws pierced her neck. Dark red blood instantly gushed out. Chu Liyue's eyes were red, but she was persistent and firm. She said, "Xiaojiu, I'm back. You come back too, okay?" Her voice was so soft that it could be easily blown away by the wind. However, the nine-colored heavenly pheasant heard it. Its eyes, which had been closed all this time, finally opened. Amidst the dull gray color, a gorgeous, colorful light suddenly erupted. Dark clouds gathered in the sky again. Boiling hot and sparkling tears fell from its magnificent eyes. "Master summons. My return. Digression. Today is even more over. Tomorrow at 12 a.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network." Chapter 714. The blood that gushed out from Chu Liyue's neck was quickly absorbed by the nine-colored heavenly pheasant. The crimson-red claws became even brighter. As though it was suddenly injected with abundant energy, the nine-colored heavenly pheasant let out a clear cry. Screech. This cry was different from the painful cry from before. It was melodious, nostalgic, joyful. It was the joy of finally seeing hope after enduring a long wait. In those countless dark days, it was chaotic, lost, and lonely. Now it could finally meet again. The layer of gray on the nine-colored heavenly pheasant's body quickly faded. The feathers all over its body became bright again. Then, a smear of red spread rapidly. Those colorful feathers started to turn red at a speed visible to the naked eye. Only that pair of eyes were like magnificent rainbow-colored crystals, dazzling and brilliant. Dark clouds rolled in the surroundings, and the wind whistled. However, the space surrounded by the nine-colored heavenly pheasant's wings was incomparably quiet and peaceful. The vast pressure on Chu Liyue instantly dissipated. Chu Liyue suddenly felt something pushing her from behind. It was the nine-colored heavenly pheasant's wings. She was even closer to it, so close that she could see her own reflection in that pair of gem-like eyes. Chu Liyue slowly stretched out her hand and wiped away its tears. She couldn't be more familiar with that gaze. "It's Dumpling. It's Little Nine again. There's Dumpling's coquettish nostalgia and Little Nine's unparalleled nobility." Chu Liyue choked and her voice trembled slightly. "You're Little Nine, and also Dumpling, right?" The nine-colored heavenly pheasant lowered its head and leaned close to her cheek, gently rubbing against it. Chu Liyue closed her eyes, and hot tears fell silently. Even though she already had some guesses in her heart still couldn't help but tremble when she received a definite answer. She had regained what she had lost. Perhaps there was nothing in the world that could make her feel more fortunate and happy than this. Chu Liyue's chest seemed to be filled with something, and surprise and nostalgia almost overflowed from the depths of her heart. It's still here, it's back. She once thought that she had lost everything. It was still waiting for her. Chu Liyue opened his bloodshot eyes. The nine-colored heavenly pheasant carefully wiped away the tears on her face. Chu Liyue looked at it. In an instant, many things flashed through his mind. Now that the truth was out, it was as if there was an invisible string that connected all those things together. Dumpling stubbornly brought her here, that colorful barrier, Lei Laosi and the other two in charge of guarding. Chu Liyue couldn't help but laugh. So it really was the two of them. Previously, she didn't dare to believe it. After all, from all aspects, the two of them were too different from before. Even she, who was standing right in front of them, did not dare to confirm their identities. However, since little Jiu was here, and Lei Laosi and the rest had been guarding this place, everything was confirmed. Chu Liyue took half a step back and looked at Little Nine. At this moment, only its tail was left on its body, and it hadn't turned red yet. "I thought I wouldn't be able to see you again. I didn't expect. Not only can I see you again, but I can also watch you break through." Little Jiu's eyes shone brightly. Suddenly, there was a hurried screech behind her. Chu Liyue turned around and saw that Hong Yao had flown over unknowingly. As Chu Liyue's body was tightly wrapped in little Jio's wings, Hong Yao could only fly to the top to look down. Chu Liyue looked up slightly and saw Hong Yao hovering above anxiously, staring at her closely. She smiled brightly and her eyes were curved. Seeing that Chu Liyue seemed to be fine, Hong Yao finally heaved a sigh of relief. But then, it realized that there was a wound on Chu Liyue's neck that was just cut open. It was even bloody. Hong Yao widened its eyes instantly and looked at little Jio furiously. Is this fellow crazy? How could it be so heavy-handed to me? Little Nine and Hong Yao had always disliked each other. Every time they met, they would at least fight. But this time, it knew it was in the wrong, so it guiltily avoided Red Demon's eyes. The Red Demon was even angrier. It flapped its wings crazily, and its small body was almost curled into a ball. It rushed over without a second thought. It couldn't even bear to hurt a single strand of her hair, but this fellow actually cut her neck. Bang! When the Red Demon hit the barrier, it finally stopped. Chu Liyue was speechless. It seemed that Hong Yao had also seen through Little Nine's identity, which was why he was so unforgiving. However, it didn't seem to realize that the current Little Nine was even stronger than before. If it continued to fight like this, it would still be the one at a disadvantage. Chu Liyue coughed and glanced at Little Nine. She clearly saw that Red Demon was coming. Couldn't she be gentler? Little Nine looked at her innocently. It's Hong Yao's fault for not paying attention. How can I blame it? Besides, it was still busy trying to break through. Chu Liyue's eyelids twitched, and she had the urge to facepalm. Her intuition told her that the fight between these two wouldn't stop. She looked back again and found that the Red Demon quickly pulled itself together and flew up again. But this time, it just stared at Little Nine from outside the barrier and didn't continue to rush over. Suddenly, there seemed to be something moving in Chu Liyue's dantian. She was stunned. Only then did she realize that this movement seemed to be coming from the Black Pyramid. It was as if something inside was about to break free. The black barrier above seemed to have begun to shake. Chu Liyue's expression froze. Ever since she obtained this Black Pyramid, it had only produced an obvious movement in the Tianling God realm once. The rest of the time, there was no movement. That time, it opened the door to the Long Yuan sword. What was it this time? Little Nine crazily swallowed the surrounding heaven and earth energy, and the aura on its body continued to rise. The fluctuations were endless. The sound was earth-shattering. Everything within a radius of dozens of miles had been affected by this powerful energy. An extremely crisp sound was heard. Upon hearing that, Chu Liyue looked up and saw that the top of the barrier suddenly shattered. Numerous cracks instantly crawled all over the transparent barrier like a spiderweb. This barrier is going to break. Retreat. Lei Laosi, who had been watching the situation closely, immediately yelled when he saw the situation. The man standing beside him moved swiftly. His movements were graceful, and in the blink of an eye, he had retreated quite a distance. At the same time, he waved his sleeves and brought Chang Wanzhou and the other two, who were still rooted to the ground, over. Chang Wanzhou reacted the fastest. He instinctively wanted to draw his sword but shockingly realized that his body couldn't move at all. It wasn't until they were all brought to that man's side that the unknown restraining force on their bodies finally disappeared. The few of them had just stood still, and before they could say anything, they saw the transparent barrier shattering. With that tree as the center, a horrifying force crazily engulfed the surroundings. The ground was lifted up continuously. Broken wood and dust scattered everywhere. At the same time, the tail of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant in the sky finally started to transform. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 7:15. When Mu Qinghe heard Lei Laoxi's shouts, she immediately retreated and summoned Hong Yao back at the same time. However, it seemed to be at odds with the 9-colored heavenly pheasant as it refused to move. Mu Qinghe frowned and pondered as she blocked the surrounding turbulence. Is Hong Yao acting like this because it's worried about Chu Luiyue or because of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Other than the one back then, there's almost no one else that can make Hong Yao so persistent. Could it be that it's hostile towards the entire 9-colored heavenly pheasant race? Mu Qinghe didn't dare to confirm her guess. From this position, she could vaguely see Chu Luiyue's sleeves, but she couldn't see anything else. However, judging from the current situation, even though Chu Luiyue was trapped by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant, he didn't seem to be in much danger for the time being. Jiang Yuqing and Elder Qiushi were both forced to retreat. Because Elder Qiushi was standing in front and was responsible for protecting Jiang Yuqing, he suffered quite a bit of injuries. However, Jiang Yuqing's current feelings were very complicated. Shangguan Wan went underground again. She clearly knew that it was that terrifying black swamp below, so why did she still go down? According to Jiang Yuqing's understanding of Shangguan Wan's character, since she did this, it must be to achieve one of her goals. What exactly is it? Suddenly, Jiang Yuqing's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that Shangguan Wan is targeting those people trapped under Wan Yeshan? Once this thought popped up, it couldn't be dismissed. Jiang Yuqing clenched his fists and furrowed his brows. Shangguan Wan is definitely capable of doing such a thing. After all, she came here this time for this matter. She actually gave up on her previous plan and chose this method. Recalling the thick and plump roots that looked like they were filled with blood, Jiang Yuqing's entire body turned numb. However, he was more worried. Jumping down in front of so many people, isn't she afraid of being exposed? She was really crazy. If Shangguan Wan knew what Jiang Yuqing was thinking at this time, she would definitely sneer at him. He wasn't the one whose Yuan meridian was crippled. He wasn't the one who was completely crippled. Of course he couldn't understand her feelings. Moreover, at that time, she had already been forced to the point where she had no way out. This was the only path she could take. Even if Shangguan Wan was given another 100 chances, she would still make the same choice. As for whether or not it would be discovered, she had done even more daring things, let alone this. As long as the method was in place, nothing would be a problem. I wonder how the third princess is doing, Elder Qiushi said worriedly. Jiang Yuqing looked up at the sky. Chu Luiyue seemed to be trapped by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. However, the strange thing was that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant was on the verge of failure just now. Its aura was in a frenzy, and it had almost lost its rationality. Under that kind of situation, it actually didn't take Chu Luiyue's life. Moreover, after Chu Luiyue left, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant somehow regained its strength. Now, it was only one step away from success. Just now, what exactly happened? Boom, boom, boom. An even stronger wave came. Everyone looked up at the same time. A bright red flame suddenly appeared at the tail of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. This light was like a knife that tore the dark sky apart. It was dazzling and eye-catching. A terrifying pressure that caused one's heart to palpitate spread out from its body. Everyone was dumbfounded as they tried to explain. That was a phoenix tail. Red-tailed red phoenix. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant had successfully broken through to become a red-tailed red phoenix. Red-tailed red phoenix. Isn't this the existence whose bloodline power is the closest to the crimson gold heavenly phoenix in the rumors? The crimson gold heavenly phoenix was one of the 2 great primordial divine beasts, along with the great void phoenix dragon. Rumor had it that there were many types below the crimson gold heavenly phoenix. Among them, the red-tailed red phoenix was the most noble. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant wasn't considered the top 9th-grade fiend in this lineage. Although everyone expected it to break through and become a phoenix, they didn't expect it to jump 3 grades and forcefully become a red-tailed red phoenix. Even Chu Luiyue was stunned. She was full of expectations for Little Nine's breakthrough, but she had never imagined that it could become a red-tailed red phoenix. Back then, before she got into trouble, Little Nine already had signs of breaking through. However, at that time, the bloodline power in its body wasn't as dense as it was now. Otherwise, Chu Luiyue wouldn't have mistaken Little Nine's identity after smelling that fragrance. What exactly had it experienced in the past 2 years? One had to know that the bloodline power in a fiend's body was basically fixed from birth. To strengthen it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Chu Luiyue was sure that if it wasn't for the rich bloodline power in its body, it definitely wouldn't be able to break through and become a red-tailed red phoenix. Countless fragments of the barrier floated over, transforming into streams of light and entering Little Nine's body. It slowly closed its eyes. Chu Luiyue's heart stirred. She suddenly looked up and frowned. The dark clouds in the sky hadn't dispersed yet. What was going on? Little Nine had already successfully broken through. Logically speaking, the clouds should have dispersed. Suddenly, a fluctuation came from Chu Luiyue's dantian. It was that black pyramid. Chu Luiyue immediately focused. Crack. A small crack suddenly appeared on that black seal. That crack was extremely small. If one didn't observe carefully, it would be impossible to notice it. However, Chu Luiyue's heart immediately jumped. The sealing power of this barrier was extremely strong. Back then, even Taizu couldn't open it. Now, it actually cracked open by itself? A brilliant light shone out from within. Chu Luiyue held her breath. Then she felt as if something was flowing out from that crack. Chu Luiyue looked carefully and was surprised to find that it was a ball of faint golden mist. After it floated out, before Chu Luiyue could see it clearly, that ball of golden mist quietly dissipated. In an instant, it disappeared without a trace. Chu Luiyue was confused. What was that? She still hadn't us? A huge roar suddenly reverberated in her mind. Chu Luiyue hugged her head. She was in extreme pain. It was as if someone was holding an axe and madly chopping at her head, trying to split it open. Ah! Chu Luiyue cried out in pain. Almost at the same time, the feathers on Little Nine's head flashed with a brilliant golden color. Its wings suddenly flapped. Then, the golden light quickly disappeared. It sank into its crimson feathers. Its movements were extremely fast, and all of this happened too suddenly, so no one noticed it at all. Everyone's attention was attracted by Chu Luiyue's cry of surprise. Chu Luiyue hugged her head tightly with both hands. In an instant, countless images flashed through her mind. Finally, one image froze. It was still that cliff. It was still that octagonal pavilion. It was still that man in the black brocade robe. Chu Luiyue's heart suddenly jumped. She seemed to have a premonition. This time, the man turned his face to the side and chuckled in her direction. He was lazy and noble. Come here. Digression, Khan is so painful. It's so slow. There's still 6 chapters left. I don't know if I can add more chapters. Just pretend I didn't say anything. Mobile phone users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 716. His face seemed to be hidden in a cloud of fog, and she couldn't see it clearly. That voice also sounded familiar, as though she had heard it somewhere before. Chu Luiyue inexplicably believed that the who was calling her. Who is this man? Why is he calling my name? Moreover, it's in such a familiar tone. Chu Luiyue wanted to walk forward uncontrollably, but her body seemed to be trapped on the spot, and she couldn't move an inch. There was a distance between the two of them, and she couldn't get close to him. That man didn't seem to be in a hurry, and he even extended a hand, as though waiting for her to go over. He stood tall, and the mountain breeze blew his black clothes. He was like a devil's snare blooming in the dark night, but he was also floating like an immortal. Chu Luiyue opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but she couldn't say a single word. There seemed to be a transparent barrier between the two of them, and they couldn't get close to each other. You are, Chu Luiyue instinctively knew this man, and her chest was filled with an impulse to call out his name. It seemed that as long as she called out his name, she could remember who he was. However, Chu Luiyue couldn't call out his name. Her heart gradually became anxious. Suddenly, a golden ray of light floated past her eyes. Chu Luiyue's eyes instantly turned into a golden dazzle. She couldn't see anything clearly. In the next moment, it was as if something had violently tugged at her. Her body fell downwards. Bam! Everything in front of her dissipated with a loud bang. Thousands of miles away, in an elegant and unique attic, a figure was sitting by the window. He had changed back to black clothes today, and he looked a little cold. At this moment, there was a chessboard in front of him. Opposite him was 36 respected Elder Ming. His slender and fair fingers picked up a white chess piece, and when it was in mid-air, his movements suddenly paused. 36 respected Elder Ming raised his head and looked at the man opposite him strangely. "Your Highness." He had always been decisive when playing chess, and he would never stop in the middle of a game. It seemed that he was thinking about something. 36 respected Elder Ming was about to ask again when he suddenly saw a golden flame ignite on his fingertip. The flames quickly condensed into half a rune in the air before quickly dissipating. The chess piece between his fingers instantly turned into a wisp of white smoke. It slowly drifted away. 36 respected Elder Ming narrowed his eyes. His Highness actually used such a seal at this time. "Your Highness, did something happen?" Rong Xiu shook his head, and his thin lips raised a light smile. "Nothing. It was just that." She had opened the seal on the pyramid faster than he had expected. 36 respected Elder Ming looked at his languid expression, the smile at the corner of his lips, and the faint pampering and pride in his eyes. He could already guess a little. "It has something to do with the young princess consort?" Rong Xiu smiled, picked up another piece, and put it down. "Yes. She should be thinking about me," Rong Xiu said calmly and confidently. 36 respected Elder Ming instantly curled his lips in disdain. It was fine if he directly said that he was thinking about his wife, but he had to say that she was thinking about him. How shameless! "Your Highness, your skin seems to be getting thicker," 36 respected Elder Ming said impolitely. Rong Xiu's smile deepened. He didn't mind him saying that and only raised his eyebrows. "I was just speaking the truth, but I don't know what she was thinking about me?" Chu Luiyue suddenly woke up and gasped for air. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat, and her clothes were already drenched in sweat, sticking to her body. It was extremely uncomfortable. A soft touch came over. Chu Luiyue looked up in a daze. It was little Nine who came over with a worried look in her eyes. She seemed to have woken up from a dream. That scene just now. It didn't seem like an illusion, but a memory. Chu Luiyue pursed her lips tightly, and a trace of panic appeared in her heart. This memory couldn't possibly belong to Chu Luiyue's body. Then, could it be hers? But in the 20 years of her previous life, she had never had such a memory. Could it be that she had really forgotten something? Chu Luiyue unconsciously clenched her fists. As the breeze blew, her body felt cold. When this scene first appeared, she only thought that it was an illusion or an illusion. But this time, she could clearly feel that the entire scene had become much clearer. It was as if something that had been sealed for a long time was taken out, and the dust was wiped away, gradually revealing its original appearance. Chu Luiyue rarely had such emotions. She faintly felt that she seemed to have missed out on something important, but she didn't even know it. What made her even more uneasy was that the man in black seemed to be someone very important to her. Chu Luiyue took a deep breath and suppressed the chaotic emotions in her heart. She looked at the black pyramid in her dantian again and found that the tiny crack on it was still there, but the faint glow that was emitted from it had disappeared. At a glance, there seemed to be nothing but darkness under the crack. The seal was indeed broken, but it wasn't completely opened. Chu Luiyue tried to shake the seal, but found that it was futile. "Girl, that crack was split open by the power of the heavenly Tao when you were contracting with this red-tailed phoenix. It won't be that easy for you to open it with your own strength." Taizu's voice suddenly sounded. Chu Luiyue was shocked. "Contract? Heavenly Tao? You still don't know? This red-tailed phoenix is already your contracted divine beast." When a 9th-grade magical beast breaks through to become a divine beast, the power of the heavenly Tao that it summons is often hidden in the 9th Tianlei. Just now, this little guy almost didn't make it through. It was only after contracting with you that it crossed this threshold. and the power of the heavenly Tao naturally divided a portion of it into your body. Chu Liuyue's mind raced. Now that she had changed her body, she naturally needed to contract with Little Nine again. Now that she thought about it, it should be when Little Nine used its claws to pierce her neck, it inadvertently succeeded in contracting? Chu Liyue touched her neck. The wound wasn't big, and although Little Nine had almost lost its mind and attacked her, but at the last moment, it seemed to have relied on its instincts to avoid all the fatal points. Now that the wound had coagulated, it would recover after resting for a while. At that time, she only wanted to summon Little Nine back and help Little Nine cross the 9th Tianlei. She didn't expect that by a freak combination of factors, she would directly contract with it. It could be seen that the fate between them couldn't be cut off no matter what. The thing in your body received the power of the heavenly Tao and became like this. It's a pity that the power of the seal is too strong, and it seems to have automatically repaired itself. Taizu's voice was somewhat regretful. He had thought that he could take advantage of this opportunity to completely remove the seal. Chu Liyue was silent for a moment, then said firmly, "There will be a day when I will open this seal." Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 717. Then, a red light flashed in front of her eyes, and Little Nine's enormous figure rapidly changed and finally became the size of a palm. Its entire body was red, and its tail, in particular, was like a burning flame that was intense and intense. Its pair of round eyes were extremely gorgeous, like the most precious gemstone, dazzling and eye-catching. Chu Liyue reached out her hand, and Little Nine flew into her palm. She didn't blink at all, and her heart was filled with joy and admiration. Although she wasn't sure how Little Nine escaped the pursuit back then, nor did she know how it transformed into Dumpling and found her, but these weren't the most important. It was still here and had returned to her side. That was enough. Chu Liyue pondered for a moment and said in her heart, "Little Nine, I'm afraid I can't call you Little Nine anymore. Why don't I call you Dumpling?" The 9-colored heavenly pheasant's identity was already sensitive enough, and if she called it Little Nine again, it would really be too ostentatious. Anyway, she had already called it Dumpling for so long, and it had always been by her side using this name, so it was most suitable to continue calling it this way. Little Nine nodded seriously and rubbed its head against her palm gently. The furry touch and its extremely obedient appearance made Chu Liyue's heart melt. She said softly, "Dumpling, I'll bring you home." When they saw that the enormous red-tailed phoenix in the sky became the size of a palm, everyone standing below was stunned. Then, when they saw it fly onto Chu Liyue's shoulder and the human and beast landed together, everyone was even more confused. In the end, when they saw Chu Liyue patting that red-tailed phoenix's head dotingly and the latter rubbing against her neck like a spoiled child, other than Lei Laosi and the other two who had been guarding, everyone else instantly felt bad. What's going on? Where's the majestic mythical beast? Where's the ferocious red-tailed phoenix? Why did it suddenly become such a tiny thing? Most importantly, it's so intimate with Chu Liyue? Looking at Chu Liyue standing in the middle and the red lump on her shoulder, the surroundings fell into an eerie silence. A gust of wind blew past, and only the rustling of leaves could be heard. Chu Liyue looked around and chuckled. "What's wrong with you guys?" This voice was like a stone falling into a calm lake, instantly stirring up countless waves. Lu Yu's name? What's wrong with you? Mu Hongyu widened her almond-shaped eyes as she asked in shock. Isn't this a mythical beast? Why did it become so small? Also, why is it in you? After stuttering for a long while, muses of the heavenly pheasant. Chu Liyue. It's probably because it's this big when it's not in combat form. But I'm not very sure. Before Chu Liyue could finish speaking, Dumpling nodded vigorously. Of course. Otherwise, it would be so troublesome to be so big. It's still the most convenient to be with master like this. Chu Liyue turned to look at it and said seriously, "Oh, it seems like I guessed right. Look, even it said so." Everyone, what did it say? No, that's not the key to the problem. Lu Yu, I'm not asking about this. Mu Hongyu opened her mouth with difficulty. She looked conflicted. Yi Ranran took the initiative to help explain and whispered, Lu Yu, what Hongyu wants to ask is, you and this red-tailed phoenix, what's going on? Wasn't it very fierce to you just now? Why is it now? Everyone had clearly seen what had happened before. This red-tailed phoenix was very rude to Chu Luiyue in the beginning. It even seemed like it wanted to kill Chu Luiyue several times. Why did the human and beast become so close in the blink of an eye? Chu Luiyue suddenly understood. Oh, you're asking about this? She smiled. Her eyes were curved, and they were as bright as the Milky Way. Because it's now my contracted magical beast. Because it's now my contracted magical beast? Everyone's expression turned sluggish for a moment. What did you say? The one who spoke this time was not Mu Hongyu, nor was it Yi Ranran. It was actually Jiang Yuqing. After being stunned for a moment, his heart was filled with shock, and he almost blurted out this sentence. Chu Luiyue glanced at him indifferently with a faint smile. Didn't I say it clearly enough just now? I said, this red-tailed red phoenix is my magical beast now. Her tone was so casual, as if she was talking about an insignificant matter. But in everyone's ears, it was like thunder. Red-tailed phoenix. Such a divine beast had actually contracted with Chu Luiyue? Elder Qiushi, who was beside him, finally came back to his senses. He stared blankly at the small ball on Chu Luiyue's shoulder, and his old face trembled violently. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. There were so many people present, so why was it Chu Luiyue's turn? The red-tailed phoenix is a divine beast, how could it take a fancy to you? Although these words were unpleasant, they were very straightforward, and they also asked the same question in everyone's hearts. If the red-tailed phoenix really wanted to find a human to contract, why did it choose Chu Luiyue among so many people? Chu Luiyue raised her chin slightly, revealing the scratch on her neck. At this moment, there were still traces of blood on it. Just now, Dumpling was swallowed by it, so I wanted to save Dumpling. But I didn't expect that an accident would happen in the middle. The red-tailed phoenix's claws pierced my neck, and I inexplicably contracted with it. I also just found out about it. Chu Luiyue explained in a sincere tone, and her expression was somewhat innocent. My magical beast was swallowed by it, so I could only use it to repay my debt. Everyone was speechless. The divine beast that millions of people yearned for, and you just made a contract with it like you had seen a ghost and took it for yourself? You even used a third-grade blood ferret to exchange for a divine beast. Everyone fell into a strange dead silence again. There was no choice, it was too shocking. It was the first time they saw a divine beast, and before they could see it clearly, Chu Luiyue had already beaten them to it. Most importantly, the whole thing was too coincidental. There was no room for anyone to interrupt. Everyone saw with their own eyes that Chu Luiyue's blood ferret was indeed swallowed by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant at that time. It was reasonable for Chu Luiyue to want to save it. Moreover, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant should have planned to kill her as well. Otherwise, Chu Luiyue wouldn't have that scratch on her neck. If it was under normal circumstances, it wouldn't matter if it killed 1 or 100 people. But the key was that it was breaking through at that time. In the end, it contracted with it just like that? Mu Hongyu gave her a thumbs up in admiration. Yi Ranran was also excited. Lu, you're amazing. Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows slightly and smiled very modestly. Not at all. I was just a little lucky. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.